Vicky, playing a live broadcast. Oh wait, no, I didn't even get OuterWilds set up. Whoops. I didn't even download it. Whoops. Well, we can listen to this.
Arming the Pakistani.
Huh? Sure. Let's listen to
Whom
this.
do you
I'll do
think they're going to
Photoshop.
shoot? It'll be us. That
Are you
pact
listening?
poisoned U.S. relations with India for the duration
Are you
of the
listening?
Cold War. Putin is dumping all his ordnance.
Huh? Are you listening? What is? Are you listening?
Now can you hear me? I plugged in the Sony controller and it's like, oh, would you like to that you have a headset on and use the shitty microphone on the Sony controller?
I don't know
All
where my
right.
controller is. Okay, I'm listening to this. I'm set it up while you play, and I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to do a little Photoshop files down that
I mean, profile name going to be, think about your profile name so you're ready to go.
Ida?
Yeah, it could be Vestral,
He
but
is
it could
leaving
be,
Siberia open.
Chunky
Goodbye.
salsa? Mild salsa?
Yeah, it could be Notch.
I think mild salsa is really cute.
Really?
They've got to communicate at some
Okay,
level to their own
mild salsa.
populations. They quite often tell you exactly what they want to do, and you think, that's insane. Who would do that? Well, hello, hello. I need to start with a disclaimer because I work for the U.S. government and they require you to do a disclaimer. So the ideas that you're about to hear are my ideas. They don't necessarily represent those of the U.S. government, the U.S. Navy Department, the U.S. Department of Defense, let alone the Naval War College where I work. Are we all good on this? All right. So today I'm going to tell you a story of three protagonists: Russia, the United States, and China, that all wanted to work their magic on India and Pakistan, which didn't exactly appreciate it. So two big topics. One is intervening in someone else's problems, a cottage industry for the United States. And also, before you do that, you really ought to check out the alignments. Who's the primary adversary of whom? How long has it been that way? And also ask these questions about all the neighbors and anyone who might want to crash the party along with you. It's also a story of a series of limited wars. What's a limited war? It means it's for something less than regime change. So however it turns out, the governments that started that war are still in place. And two of them resulted in quick victories, the ideal in warfare. The first one was the Sino-Indian War of 1962, and the other one was the Bangladesh War of Independence in 1971. And these wars changed things in many short-term expected ways, and then in many long-term, highly unexpected ways. So here's my game plan, and it's literally a game plan. I'm going to start out with the pivotal decisions made by different players that then, once they're made, certain things are foreclosed and certain things are possible. And this is the playing field that's delimited by these pivotal decisions. And then I'm
I
going to
need to
look
turn
at
the
teams.
music down some
Some
more if I'm
allies
going
were
to listen
prime
to Sarah.
allies, others were subprime, and they mixed and matched over time. So then I'll do teams, and then I'll do the game, the interaction, and then at the end I'm going to do the plays, some of the techniques and things that you can do to play this game. Pivotal
Are you
decision
playing
number
Sarah
one.
still? No?
When
still
Mao
playing.
won the Chinese Civil War in
Sure?
1949, it didn't end. He also
Stream
spent the next
paused.
2 years not only eliminating
Paused?
nationalist
Because you minimized your
resentments,
application, it
but
says.
also conquering Xinjiang and Tibet.
Oh.
Tibet had been autonomous since
Can you hear it?
1911 when the last
Yes.
dynasty had collapsed.
How much did I miss?
And Mao decides that he is going
Not
to
much.
reconquer Tibet. Tibet's
Right.
an interesting place. It contains, I think, about 40% of China's mineral resources. So there's a lot of money to be made in Tibet for those with the capital to invest in big mines. If you look at this map, the Han Chinese, the preponderant group of China, they dominate as far west as the Chongqing Basin and Sichuan. China has put large armies into Tibet exactly twice. Once under the Qianlong Emperor in the late 18th century, and they didn't stay for very long. And then under Mao in 1950, and they have stayed forever and built roads so they could keep on sending more in. Between 1950 and 1957, China built a series of road systems through Tibet, And the western route there is the only one that provides year-round traffic. The problem with the other two is, well, check it out. They go through 14 or 15 mountain ranges. So it means you go vertical up, vertical down, do that 14, 15 times. And then between monsoon rains and snow and mudslides, they're very difficult to maintain. And then the eastern one crosses the major roads, river systems of South Asia. So that's difficult. So only the western route is the really good one. And it's really important for the Chinese. If you want to conquer Tibet, you truly want that one. All right, so if you look at this, that western route provides not only the ability to control Tibet, but it also provides a pincer onto Xinjiang. If China wants to come in one way and the other way, it's a good way to get in. If you look on those two circles there, those are the disputed areas between China and India. The northern one is the Aksai Chin Plateau, which China has taken from India, and India still claims. And in the south is the Arunachal Pradesh, which India still owns, but China claims. So these are the areas that they're fighting over. But once China took Tibet, before there'd been a big buffer zone between China and India, right? There's all this Tibet, and no one could really get in there. Now China's built roads, so it can get into places where India cannot deploy troops until it gets into the road races with the Chinese. And so it reduces the buffer zone between China and India to these small Himalayan kingdoms of Nepal, Bhutan, and Sikkim. So it changes things. So that's pivotal decision number one, decide to conquer Tibet. Pivotal decision number two is the United States, in order to deal with the Soviet unions under Eisenhower, did what the wits back in the day called pactomania. What is that? It's forming all sorts of bilateral relations and also regional groupings in order to counter the Soviets institutionally and wall them in that way. And part of this was what was called the Northern Tier Strategy, as seen in the Baghdad Pact, where you get Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Pakistan to form this thing, and it's to wall off the Soviet Union from the oil fields of the Middle East. And the other thing you should look at this map before it goes away, look where Pakistan's located, where you think it is, and then go to the east, and that's East Pakistan. In the 1971 war, there's going to be a civil war, and Pakistan's going to lose East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh today. So just keep that in mind. So as part of the sweetener for Pakistan to join the Baghdad Pact, the United States allied with Pakistan and gave them a big military aid treaty. And here's Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, and he is horrified. A military pact between Pakistan and the United States changes the whole balance of power in this part of the world, affects us most, especially the United States must realize that the reaction of India is going to be, you're arming the Pakistanis. Whom do you think they're going to shoot? It'll be us. And the Indians were just appalled that we did this. And afterwards, Eisenhower admitted it was perhaps the worst kind of plan and decision we could ever have made. It was a terrible error, but now we're stuck with it. Because what the United States is slowly discovering is that if you arm either India or Pakistan in this period, it's going to aim it at the other one. And so that pact poisoned U.S. relations with India for the duration of the Cold War and set up things in ways the United States ultimately wasn't happy with. Okay, those are two pivotal decisions. Now for a pivotal situation. It's really the devolving situation between Russia and China. Until Mao got atomic weapons in 1964, he really had to shut up. And because he needed Russian technological aid, he's been totally cut off from the West after the Korean War. He's being isolated. So he truly needs Soviet aid. And he also, if he wants nuclear weapons, he needs some of their aid to do that as well. So he has to keep his mouth shut. But once he detonates an atomic weapon, here's what he tells the Russians, and they just about lose it. There are too many places occupied by the Soviet Union. The Russians took everything they could. We have not yet presented a count of this list. Under the Tsars, the Russians took from the Chinese sphere of influence territory exceeding U.S. east of the Mississippi. Think the Chinese didn't notice? Yes, they noticed. So Mao all of a sudden is calling that, and the Russians are appalled. But Mao has other gripes against the Russians. Stalin, in the lead up to World War II, had made sure to set up the Chinese to fight Japan so that he wouldn't have to. So that leaves him just fighting Nazis, not Nazis and Japanese. And then Stalin takes Mongolia, which had formerly been a part of the Chinese sphere of influence. And in the Korean War, he's more than happy to fight to the last Chinese. And then during the Chinese Civil War, the Russians tell Mao, oh, stop, Yangtze, you need to take a little breather here, because he wants a divided China, like the divided Germany he has, and then the divided Korea he's going to get. You want to be surrounded by these little broken states around you if you're a continental power. And then when Stalin dies and Mao wants to be senior statesman of communism, Khrushchev is appalled by that. Then Mao is appalled when Khrushchev does de-Stalinization, because Mao has his own cult of personality. And then Khrushchev wants to do peaceful coexistence with the West while Mao is ramping it up in the Cultural Revolution. So there's no meeting of the minds. And then all this becomes very public when it hits the propaganda press of the communists of the Sino-Soviet split in 1960. All right, the Russians have their own gripes about the Chinese, and here's how they go. The Russians look around at the West, and particularly the United States, and go, wow, they got bases everywhere. The British have got bases everywhere. How come our allies won't give us bases? I mean, well, if you occupy Eastern Europe, the whole place is a base, but that's a different matter. So the Russians want the Chinese to let them keep a couple of remaining czarist treaty ports, essentially, and wants to expand them. And the Chinese say, forget it. And in fact, after the Korean War, when the Chinese have troops all up in Manchuria, which is where these bases were located, and there's a succession struggle going on because Stalin's just died, the Russians have to return the bases because there's just too much bad stuff happening where they live. And then what Mao does in 54 and 58, which just appalls the Russians, are these two Taiwanese Strait crises. What's going on? Mao is lobbing all kinds of ordnance on these islands that are owned by Taiwan that are very close to the People's Republic's shores. And the Russians are appalled. They are not consulted, and yet they have a friendship treaty that obligates them to join a war under certain circumstances. And the Russians are going, whoa, 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 whoa. There could be nuclear follow-on from this stuff. So the Russians then ask the Chinese if it's okay if they have a combined naval base on China's shores, and China says, forget it. The Russians are thinking, okay, well, then we're not going to give you any of the plans for the atomic weapon. And it all devolves. So there's no love lost on either side. And then what exacerbates these tensions is the Vietnam War, where China wants influence over neighbor Vietnam. That is pretty typical. But Russia wants influence over Vietnam to do a pincer on China, which China doesn't like at all. Meanwhile, both of them want to prove their revolutionary credentials by aiding the Vietnamese, North Vietnamese. So Russia's aid needs to come by train over China, lest the United States sink at the good stuff if it goes by sea. So the Chinese feel obliged to let it go through, but they're just hassling the Russians the whole time through. They take it apart, tear it apart, say that it was from China, and the Russians are just apoplectic. So their relations are getting worse and worse and worse, and the squabbling is just incessant. So it's not surprising that the Sino-Soviet border war of 1969 breaks out during the Vietnam War. And while all this is going on, this is one of the river islands. The Amur River forms much of their border, and this is one of the islands there. And there's much fighting over it. And the Russians come to us, the Americans, and say, is it okay if we nuke these people? And the United States says, no, there's no way it's okay to nuke these people. And Mao figures it out. The one that wants to nuke you, that's the primary adversary. So prior to that moment, the United States is the primary adversary of both Russia and China. Now with this, they're primary adversaries of each other. It causes a reshuffling of the allies, and I'll get to that later.
I remember them hitting each other a lot during the Cold War, and I didn't understand why.
Of these decisions that delimitate.
Do you know Russia checked with the U.S. to see if it's okay to nuke the Chinese?
No, I did not know that.
And here we got Mao.
It's funny that they asked their enemy if it's okay.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's good that they did, because you can't, how would the USA react if Russia starts lobbing nukes around? I mean, the USA would have some strong feelings about that.
Even if it's their own ally?
Yeah, even if it's one of their enemies.
Allies. And if you're a political scientist, you've got something that's much more complicated, but forget it. I just can't handle it. So we're going to do it this way. All right. So Stalin didn't think much of Nehru at all. He thought he was a lackey of British colonialism, but Khrushchev thought India was really important to counterbalance
How's that download coming?
China. And here's Nehru thinking about it. We have to be on
you have to be offline.
Russia and America.
Oh, good.
He felt much more in common with Russia. Why? Because he favored Fabian socialist economic policies that were much more akin to what's going on in Russia than it was in the United States. Moreover, the United States was segregated, and which appalled Nehru. And in addition, the United States was cozying up to all the colonial powers. So Nehru thought the Russians were the better bet. While all this is going on, the Indians were non-aligned, and they treated the Chinese really generously. And I've got a whole list of generosity. So India immediately recognizes China in 1950. Countries like the United States didn't forever. And when the San Francisco Treaty, I think it's signed in 1951 in the United States, ending the war with Japan, India refuses to sign because China and Russia aren't there to sign as well. And then to help China break out of its diplomatic isolation at the end of the Korean War, India signs a friendship treaty with China. And as part of that friendship treaty, it recognizes Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. Under international law, contrary to what Vladimir Putin is doing lately, under international law, if you recognize someone's sovereignty over territory, that is permanent. You cannot back out of it legally under international law. So the Chinese promise, I don't know, there's some like peaceful coexistence or whatever. They're promising the Indians, but that has no permanence under international law, whereas this thing does. And then from 1960 on, the Indians are voting to seat the People's Republic of China, not Taiwan, on the UN. Meanwhile, in the background, all this road building is going on. Those roads are being built between 1950 and 1957. And the Indians aren't going to figure out until 1958 that the roads are there. Meanwhile, roads completed. The Chinese want to complete.
Why is it not going through? Aisha. What is this game? Honey. Oh, there you go. Let me play
their
this.
control over Tibet. And so they're going to send big armies up there. And Tibetan culture is much more, it's of Indian origin.
So loud.
So this repression of Tibetan culture just appalls the Indians. And then 2 days before the People's Liberation Army is going to make it into Lhasa, which is the capital of Tibet, the Dalai Lama flees. He's the spiritual leader of Tibet. He flees to India, where he's remained ever since, to the absolute horror and anger of China. So, at about this time, the Chinese come to the Indians and say, look, why don't we do a swap on sovereignty? You recognize our sovereignty over that Aksai Chin Plateau where nobody lives, but it's really good for the roads, for this western route. And then we'll recognize your sovereignty over this much more densely populated Arunachal Pradesh. And Nehru doesn't want to hear anything about it. So, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Russia is much too busy worrying about who's going to be lobbing nukes at whom, this is when China launches. And in the 1960 Sino-Indian War, and China just plain takes the Aksai Chin Plateau. The Indians are appalled because they don't have any roads to be able to deploy up there, whereas the Chinese do. Their defeat is just total, and they can't believe the Chinese did this to them. Here's Nehru afterwards. There are not many instances in history where one country, that is India, has gone out of her way to be friendly and cooperative with the Chinese government and people and plead their cause in the councils of the world, and then for the Chinese government to return evil for good, and even to go to the extent of committing aggression and invade our sacred land. Who does this? So I get it. The Chinese get the territory they want. That was the goal of that war. But what they have done is taken a country, India, which had its leadership terribly idealistic, not interested in becoming militarized at all, and making them angry forever. India immediately doubles the size of its army to within the next 10 years to up to 750,000 people, creates 10 mountain divisions useful against China, and they've never ceased being so angry. And then if you think about this, what if, instead of playing this game this way, China and India had teamed up? I would suspect we would be in a completely very different world order now if that is what they'd done instead. But this is China's decision, not India's fault on this one. All right. So that wasn't great. So let's check out other possibilities. Once that happens to India, India is all of a sudden looking for Russia to counterbalance China. And you also have Pakistan wondering what to do. And what the Pakistani notice after all this, that, well, the Chinese are not going to be teaming up with India, right? They've just invaded the place. And so this is when Pakistan sees that China might have real possibilities as an ally. And Bhutto is going to play the China card for the nuclear chip, trying to get Chinese help for all of that. And here's what happens. So you have the 62 war, and then in 1963, Pakistan really inexplicably is ceding territory to China. Who does that? And there are various possibilities, but I'm surmising
Jump
it's
is very
help
strange.
on nuclear development. That would explain why you would give.
Why
a
would
lot
they
of
have the jump
territory.
like
We
this?
don't know. There was supposed to be
I
some
don't
missile
know.
defense pact, maybe, and there's some other things going on. Anyway, you can imagine what it may or may not have been. Okay. In the case of Pakistan and China and India and Russia, they had quite a good relationship because the Pakistanis and the Chinese shared India as their problem, and the Russians and the Indians shared China as their problem, and that worked pretty well. But the United States was just a disaster from both
What did I do?
Indian and Pakistani point of view, and vice versa. Because the
The
United
controls
States
are in the
wanted to
top
befriend
right. It
both
took
of
me a
them.
little bit to
But if
realize
you
how to
befriend
control that
one,
thing.
the
What's
other is
LS?
appalled.
Left
And so the United
stick?
States wound up appalling everybody.
Yeah.
And
What's
so
LS?
what the United
Left
States wanted to
joystick,
have
left and right and
happen
stuff.
is for India and Pakistan to put aside their
Wait, how do
differences
you
and then
Wait, how do you
combine
thrust? I'm
against
very confused.
China and stop
The right
communism
trigger.
from spreading.
Oh.
India and
Go
Pakistan
up, left
want to
trigger to go
use the
down.
United States for maximum
That's
aid
left
to
trigger.
use against
There
the
you go.
other, which is a non-starter for the United States. And then Pakistan really would like it if the United States would be nice with China as well, because Pakistan wants to have good relations with the United States and China. And that's a non-starter for the United States until 1971, when there are secret visits and things going. It's later on.
I
Okay,
hate this.
so in 1962, India gets trounced in this war with China. They look like they're militarily feckless. And then in 1964, Nehru dies. Right, he'd been the head of India since independence in 1947. He'd been there a long time, so he's dead. So 1965 for Pakistani looks like a good year to settle border problems. And so what they do is first they invade through the south. If you look way down at the bottom there, the Rana Kutch, and that seems to go pretty well. And then they decide they want to go for the thing they really care about, which is Kashmir. And they do that. Well, the enemy gets the vote, and the Indians invaded straight through Lahore, which isn't remotely what the Pakistanis had in mind. And then the United States does a double arms embargo on both of them for doing this. And the problem is the Pakistanis are much more dependent on U.S. military aid. The Indians were more diversified, so they just didn't have
This
enough
sucks. I hate
spare
this.
parts
I
to
should never be a
continue
pilot.
this thing. So it's a very unhappy event for them. They lose it. And what happens, neither the United States nor Russia wants either one of them fighting that war. The Russians are thinking, we want the military aid to go to India in order to counterbalance China, not to decimate the Pakistanis. And the United States doesn't want it either. So the United States is very happy that the Soviets
Good enough.
broker the Tashkent Declaration that ends this war. But Pakistan is worse off after this thing. It is, and India has restored its reputation for knowing what it's doing on the battlefield. So, for Pakistan, the United States is really problematic because we're interested in being nice to them when we want something out of them, and then we're not so interested when we don't want something out of them because we don't share a primary enemy. So what we really wanted were listening bases. The technology of the day was such that if you want to surveil the Soviet Union, you want to send these big U-2 planes over, and given their ranges, and you're not supposed to be doing it, and so we had U2 bases, I think
I don't
Norway,
think
West
I like
Germany,
talking to
Turkey,
people very much.
Pakistan.
Is there a lot of
Yeah, I'm gonna
talking in
do
this
it.
game?
Japan. And in
I don't
addition,
know.
we had a listening base at Badabar, and these are really important things for us during this period. So we're paying the Pakistanis a lot of money to get it. Except there was one of these U-2 planes gets shot down over the Soviet Union. They finally get so they can, because they fly at really high altitudes, they shoot it down. And Khrushchev is furious. He hauls in the Pakistani ambassador in Moscow and he goes, "Where is this place, Peshawar? We've circled it on the map." And we're going to blow it off the map if you all don't wise up. And the Pakistanis are like, whoa, 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 whoa. And so between these sort of threats in 1960 about the U-2 and then the United States freezing arms in the 1965 war, which the Pakistanis believe that they lost it over that. Oh, yeah, and by the way, in that 1965 war, the United States had, when we provided arms to everybody, we said, oh, we will guarantee that no one uses it, that Pakistanis and Indians don't use it against each other. And of course, we could do nothing about that. And the 1965 war, the Pakistanis are using U.S. tanks to go after Indians in the largest tank war battle since World War II. So there are a lot of upset people in South Asia. But here is Ayub Khan, leader of Pakistan, telling the United States that the United States forgets that our security hazards and political liabilities have increased to a dangerous level due to this U-2 stuff. And we kept our part of the contract whilst the Americans betrayed us at every turn. They built up India against us. They failed to help us in the 65 war and finally stopped military aid. They think that we exist for their convenience and that our freedom is negotiable. Dream on. So when the lease came up for the listening post at Badabar in 1968, the Pakistanis canceled it. They're sick of it. Meanwhile, the Indians weren't too thrilled about the United States
cool.
either. This is earlier when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. Here's Mahatma Gandhi telling him Allied support for freedom and democracy seems hollow so long as America has the Negro problem in her own home. Indians were appalled by segregation. They knew exactly which end of the bus they'd be sitting on. So there are issues both ways. And in fact, Nehru and his daughter Indira Gandhi found the United States really impossible to work with. And they looked at capitalism as the way station to imperialism and fascism, whereas Americans looked at socialism as the way station to communism. So there's no meeting of minds on all of this. And so if you look at the alignments of primary adversaries, India and Pakistan from most of the time are primary adversaries. India is always Pakistan's primary enemy, but you could argue that with the 62 war, is it Pakistan or is it China who's the primary adversary of India? And then when you get to the 1971 war, which I'll discuss a little more in a second, where Bangladesh is broken off and then Pakistan has less than half the population, then you could argue that for India, China is the primary adversary. And then if you look at that reshuffling, if you also look at the 1969 war that reshuffles the nuclear powers, so formerly Russia and China had shared the United States as their primary enemy, but after the 69 war, they're each other's primary enemy, and this gives the United States a swing position of team up with A or team up with B. And the United States teamed up with China to overextend Russia in the Cold War, because I had always felt that the Soviets were the bigger threat in those days. So anyway, as you're looking at alignments, you can apply this kind of framework to any country on the planet to try to figure out what's going on. And think about how alliances work. If I look at the World War II allies, probably one of the most effective alliances in world history, if you think about what people ultimately want, then the British want an empire in which the sun never sets. The United States wants to decolonize everybody, and Joe Stalin wants a communist wonderland. Those are mutually exclusive, but to get there, you have to go through the common way station of getting rid of Hitler. So the common existential threat can be a super glue of most unlikely partners. But let's look at the axis. What they want at the end of the war are spheres of influence in different parts of the world. So for Italy, it's empire in the Mediterranean, Japan in the Pacific, and then Hitler, it's all over Eurasia. That's not mutually exclusive. But if you look who they're the primary enemy who stands in the way of those plans, it's Britain for Italy, it's Russia for the Germans, and for the Japanese, it's first China and then the United States. None of it aligns, so they fight parallel wars and allow the Allies to take them out in detail. So when you're thinking about alliances in the world today, when you're wondering what's going on with Iran or whatever, figure out who's their real primary enemy. Get it straight. Does that primary enemy, is that an existential threat for them? So if you've got countries that line up on same primary enemy, existential threat for all around, the most unlikely people will cooperate. On the other hand, people who are very likely to cooperate, maybe like the fascists, they all shared this basic ideology, but if they don't have the same primary enemy and the same theater of interest, geographically the same theater, they may not cooperate very well at all. So you can apply this to anything you want to apply to. So, back to the game here. If you're looking at the cards people have to play, the United States has lousy cards because we don't share primary enemies with anybody, so it's a stalemate. You help India, the Pakistanis hate you. You help Pakistanis, the Indians hate you. It's no win. But if you look at India and Russia share a China problem. That's good. They can cooperate on that. And then you have Pakistan and China. They share an India problem. They can make things happen over that. So there are cards for them to play and zero for the United States to play. It's just the way it is. So,
I don't think this game will work very well with me.
The name of the
I didn't talk to anybody, and I don't know where to go.
Is to get the outcome that you
Have you made it to the observatory yet?
I made it to lift.
It's like, how do you play this
Okay,
game
cool.
of five
get the launch
person,
codes
five
from the
country
observatory and get
cutthroat
out of your
billiards
Where's the
to
observatory?
get remotely what you want?
There's signs in the village
So
that
for
lead
the
you towards the
English majors
observatory.
among you, I have a
Go up,
metaphor.
up,
For the rest
basically.
of you, you can just
I
bear
am
with
up.
us.
Keep
Imagine a
looking
game
around.
in which every ball can be a cue ball.
Ooh,
Is that the
And players
observatory?
can take turns, come, leave,
Ooh.
you're a
do whatever at will.
move through your bear.
Sometimes they'll cooperate some of the time,
Did I die?
but they don't
I
necessarily
died.
want
How
to
did
pocket put
Oh,
the
no.
same ball in the same.
Somebody die
You
on?
are dead.
And, so if that's the case, there's going to be no enduring cooperation.
Honey bun.
You want to have wiggle as the ultimate shot you want to take, but as you're
Credit.
taking the intervening shot.
Hey, you really died. You're not supposed to die, I guess.
How on earth do you get
I didn't realize
through
you
this?
can die.
So this is what the
No,
Wait,
me
new
neither.
expedition? I want to.
So
How
look
do
at
I
this
have to do a
map
new expedition?
and where Pakistan's
I don't know if you
Ah.
could save or what.
strategic location in the center
Okay,
of, not
nope,
quite
nope.
center, but of
that's
Eurasia,
pretty
the
funny.
center of the Soviets' boundary there. And I'm going to give you a map. This is from Halford Mackinder. He's one of the
Okay,
most
okay.
famous people to publish on geopolitics. This is his 1904 map. It's actually quite famous. And he talked about how Russia occupies the heartland. In his day, it was all these railway systems. He thought that was the prime piece of real estate in the world.
Okay,
And then
can't
it's
jump.
surrounded by this intermarginal crescent. You look where Pakistan's
Can I not
located.
jump up here?
It's right in the center there,
Okay.
right up by
God.
Russia, and it's a really crucial location.
I don't feel like playing this game.
Before satellite
No,
imagery
you
was
can't give up that
available
fast.
To put listening posts on Russia. Russia's huge.
Oh,
huge.
I'm
You
a
gotta have a
text
bunch
race.
of listening posts to track down these things. And then if you want access,
Technically, she
to
didn't recommend
Afghanistan,
you
which
play it.
Russians
I
don't
think
really want
there's
access, and of course
maybe a
Russians
reason
don't
for that.
really want access. So it's a strategic location. For the Pakistanis, the United States was so frustrating to deal with because we'd be on and off interested in them because we don't align on a primary enemy. So pre-satellite imagery, we really wanted to cozy up the Pakistanis so we could have U-2 bases, but then there's different technology changes.
How did you die?
I jumped and I guess I got
we want
stuck
this listening
somewhere and
post
I
in
don't know where I
Bada
got stuck and it
but
was like
technology will
killing me
eventually change.
slowly and I didn't know how to get out and I died.
We truly want the Pakistanis to get the mail through to China when we're trying to break China out of diplomatic isolation and then cooperate against the Soviet Union, and Pakistan delivers the mail. But then we set up an alternate setup in Paris to go through our embassies that way, and Pakistan is again irrelevant. And then when Russia's in Afghanistan, Pakistan's essential to get aid to insurgents to cause the Russians trouble. And then, of course, when we're in Afghanistan, we really want to cooperate with the Pakistanis, and that works until we cap Osama bin Laden without telling Pakistanis.
Did he say cap?
Their territory
Yeah, she did.
Then relations are really not so great.
This is funny.
And so it's a very
Popped a
bumpy
cap in
ride.
his ass.
In these periods when
I wish
we
he
really
said that.
need the Pakistanis,
Popped a
we don't
cap
pay
in his
attention
ass
to
to
human
Osama
rights
bin
or
Laden.
they want nuclear proliferation. And so the proliferation is pretty steady. So if you look at after the United States having trouble negotiating all this so that whatever you do in the short term doesn't wreck you in the long term.
Looks
But
like
in
that
order to get to the long
laboratory
term, of course,
is
you've got to
looking that
go
way.
through the short term. So after the U-2 crash in Russia or gets shot down and the Pakistanis are having a heart attack about that, that's when the Pakistanis look to cultivating better relations with China because the U.S. relationship is just too potentially costly, and the Americans cut off the military aid. And then when the Pakistanis are being very nice about delivering the mail for Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger to line up invitations in Beijing, the United States is ignoring a humanitarian nightmare because all of this, that coincides with the 1971 Bangladeshi War for Independence. So let me explain what that is to you. So Pakistan was holding presidential elections. The dominant ethnic group in Pakistan are Punjabis.
I really want.
Sometimes the Sindhis, like the Bhutto family, I think they're Sindhi. But anyway, generally speaking,
really want to play
particularly the
Subnautica,
army,
but
the
co-op.
Punjabis dominate.
It makes me want to play
Bengalis live in
Subnautica a little bit.
Bangladesh.
Yeah.
They won the election.
Yeah.
And the Punjabis are furious. So they send the army to start butchering
Did I get the
people
launch
in East
codes? Where the
Pakistan
hell's the
to overturn
observatory?
the election. So there are refugees pouring into India. So this is the backdrop of what is going on there. And for anyone who wasn't in the know, the United States is saying nothing about this. The United States, there's this massive humanitarian crisis. The United States has nothing to say. The United States has something to say about
I got
everything.
the launch codes.
But it had to do.
You got the launch
this
codes?
Is the moment
Yes.
that Nixon
It's
is
this guy. I
trying
talked to
to get himself
Hornfeld.
invited to Beijing.
Well, I know that's
so
his
that he can
name.
talk
That
to
doesn't
them
mean
now
anything to me because I
about
don't know where he is.
cooperating with the
Oh, he's on the top
Chinese
of,
to
at the very top of
overextend
the
the Soviets
observatory.
in the Cold War.
Hey,
which is
honey, I had to
ultimately
restart
what
the
we
game
do.
and
I know. I get it.
This is integral to this.
Yeah, but I did
But
like
everyone else is
a
looking
tutorial
going,
and
what on earth
multiple
is going
tutorials
on?
and stuff that you're probably
So
just skipping.
you have
I did one.
Nixon's doing the mediation in the
Yeah, it's not bad.
background. We got refugees flying all over the place. India comes to the United States and says, look, you need to tell the Chinese not to intervene in this thing. And the Indians also say, you need to bring this up at the UN, the human rights stuff, because India's literally getting millions of refugees trying to flee this.
Oh, there's a save point?
This mass. And
A
the United
statue
States
with
won't
3
do any of
eyes
it.
is
It
your
gets even
save
better.
point.
The United States has the gall to blame the Indians for the war. Dream on. So Indira Gandhi is just furious at this one. And so the United States had wished that India would cease being non-aligned and aligned with the West. Oh, well, they cease being non-aligned, all right. They sign a military pact with Russia over this. And then they upgrade their relationship with Vietnam, which totally upsets the United States. And it gets even better. They shut down Indians. They won't give scholars any visas to come to India to study India. So you wonder why U.S. universities didn't have any Indian studies programs. It's all about this. So that explains what's going on with all of that. Total
Observatory is allegedly this way.
But for Pakistan, as all this is going on, the Shah of Iran falls in, I think it's like February 1979, and then the Russians raid Afghanistan in December 1979, and suddenly Pakistan is totally essential once again. And the Pakistanis are really getting sick of being kicked around. So when outgoing President Jimmy Carter offers them, I don't know, $400 million or something, this is Zia here going peanuts to the peanut farmer.
Oh, cool.
And the incoming Reagan administration then ups it to $3.2 billion. And that money gets funneled through the Inter-Service Intelligence Directorate. It's like the, I don't know, the CIA in Pakistan. And when you put that kind of money into that kind of bureaucracy, you're going to make them incredibly powerful. And then they're the ones who decide how they're going to allocate money to insurgents in Afghanistan. And I got it. There weren't any great choices.
There was an upstairs in that building.
Some really anti-Western folks in there.
That's kind of cool.
Some guy named Osama, last name Bin Laden. But anyway, I'm not sure of the details on that one. But it is going to have 9/11 follow-on effects. And also, the ISI is also taking some of that money and putting it into Kashmir, which is going to have real problems for India later on. So there are real ramifications for all of this, of needing Pakistan, but actually what is happening anyway. And then throughout, there is the Pakistanis are getting closer and closer to building the bomb. So when the Russians go piling into Afghanistan, here's Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's national security advisor, telling him, our security policy cannot be dictated by our non-proliferation policy. Really? I thought that was a
RB?
security
RB?
policy. And the problem with peripheral
You switch your
proliferation is
thing
it
back,
tends to
your
be a
tab,
one-way street,
What tab?
whereas Afghanistan
so I
is
can
steady.
see Sarah Champagne on
And
the
then
other
here,
monitor.
Deng Xiaoping was in town,
Can you hear?
and he told Carter,
Yeah, I can
we
hear it,
call
but I
the
want to see
decision
it.
to basically toss all these proliferation
Oh,
human
on
rights
Discord.
considerations for
Yeah.
Pakistan and just arming them. No kidding, because the Chinese are providing the nuclear spare parts. So the United States isn't the only country to have trouble navigating this cutthroat billiards. The Pakistanis have their share of boomerangs. Just look how the wars work. So wars create incredible costs. So the 1965 war,
The fuck?
Pakistanis get exactly nothing. And the United States, Pakistan had been the largest aid recipient of the I'm not sure if I got that right. But anyway, they're a huge aid recipient from the United States. Well, after this war, we're not so interested. So that's a lot of money down the tubes. And then in the 1971 war, great guys, you lose Bangladesh, which, by the way, has over half your population. So that Pakistan is no longer the most populous Muslim country. Indonesia is. And if you look at the Kargil War in 1999, this is when Pakistan tries to again
I have
get
an
rid of
oxygen
the line
tank.
of control
Okay.
in Kashmir to try to take some more of Kashmir back. Pakistan has to cross right
You
back,
say something about a
and then it
save
gets
point
sanctions for all
somewhere.
of this. So none of these
It's in
wars
the
have actually worked
observatory.
out very
So
well
I have
for
to get the launch
Pakistan.
code.
And then if you think
I
about it,
don't think I used that. Oh, the
India
three
and
eyes
Pakistan
statue. Is that what you said?
trade
Yeah.
partners.
Oh, I didn't
So you
interact with
take
it.
all
Was I
these
supposed
wars
to?
and just add up all
Yes.
the costs, and then think of the opportunity
Should I
for
go
Pakistan
back?
to
I'll
be able
go
to take
back.
this money
Oh.
and spend it on road systems, on education, and then all the lost trade. It gives you a sense of the real costs of all of this. Okay, well, those are Pakistan's problems. India has its own problems. Here you've got Indira Gandhi and Richard Nixon. They really didn't like each other. I mean, look at her. She looks as if she's just been fed bad fish, and he looks like he served it up. And they cannot abide by each other. So in the 1940s, when Kashmir is erupting, Indira Gandhi thinks, well, no, it's Nehru, her dad, thinks that the United States should be supporting India because it's secular and it's democracy. And the United States is appalled during the Korean War when India remains non-aligned instead of supporting the United States because it's secular and democratic. And the Pakistanis are totally outraged because they're looking at this and go, okay, these Indians are non-aligned. We're aligned. We're taking these risks at Peshawar and stuff with the U-2s. And you're helping these people who are about to ally with the Soviet Union? Who are you kidding? So it's a total mess. So the Indians have their own self-inflicted blows. Nehru and his very controversial but his devoted advisor, Krishna Menon, and his daughter Indira Gandhi were really good at making these totally insulting remarks to American VIPs. Okay, it hits the target without a doubt, but the ego that has just been hit is huge. And like an elephant is not about to forget. And meanwhile, Pakistan, in contrast, is just being this welcoming host. So the United States is going, India and Pakistan is better. And it makes really bad trend lines for India because in the
How do
1962 war, the
I?
United States supported India. In the
Wait, do I
1965
interact
war,
with this
it's neutral.
statue? Really?
In the 1971 war, it supports
It's
Pakistan.
supposed to look
That's
at
not
you.
great. And then
Oh, it
India's
did.
own
I ran all the way back here because I thought I was supposed to
of
interact with it.
solutions
For
to
fuck's
the
sakes.
insurgency of Kashmir doesn't make that thing go away. It just gets worse. So they have their own problems. China also has its problems with the interaction. It's complicated. So on the one hand, on the Sino-Indian War, absolutely, China gets the territory. But at what cost? You've got this permanent enemy forever. And as opposed to teaming up with them, if they teamed up, they actually would have had incredible leverage for what the global order is going to look like. But that's just not to be. And moreover, if you look at the 1971 war, after the United States won't help with China, India's gone, okay, I think we need nuclear weapons because then we'll be able to protect ourselves against China. And after that war, when Pakistan's lost over half its population and has to deal with Indian population and territorial just overwhelming superiority, the Pakistanis go, I think we need nuclear weapons in order to solve this problem. So it's going to be proliferation all over the place. But as a result of the 1971 war, where the, the Pakistan tries to overturn the elections, here you have an Indian defense analyst, Subramaniam, saying the Pakistani decision to overturn its elections by deploying the army to East Pakistan gave
The
India
fuck
an
is going on?
opportunity the like of which
Kind of
it
cool,
never
but I
could
don't
again.
get it.
And what they did is they
Where am I
armed
supposed to
insurgents
go?
in East Pakistan, then
Anywhere?
sent the
Everywhere?
army in, and that was it for Pakistan.
I feel like I'm not the
in,
type of
East
person who
Pakistan.
would appreciate this game.
The interaction for Russia works a little better. For
Huh.
Russia and India, it's really quite a good relationship. What Russia offers to India not only military and economic aid, but also
No.
very useful vetoes from
Ow.
the UN Security Council. India does not want plebiscites in Kashmir that it might lose, so it gets the Soviet Union to veto those things, so there are no plebiscites. And then as India is trouncing Pakistan in the 1971 war, the United States wants them to halt. India, no way. India wants to finish the job, so it gets the Soviet Union to veto that one, and India does indeed finish the job.
I do not enjoy
And
this.
meanwhile, for Russia, India is really useful. It's a good counterbalance for China. So theirs is rather a beautiful relationship. They have very cordial relations. Okay. So I think I've now covered the playing field, right? And I've covered the players and teams and their problems with interacting. That's very difficult. Now for some of the plays and the instruments of national power. And here's the menu of choices. You can start with the light items: diplomacy, public support, or denial of public support. You can move
The
into
fuck is
more
this?
expensive things down the menu. Okay, for one of the things you could do is help negotiate a really useful treaty, which the United States did. It brokered this Indus Water
Okay.
Treaty of 1960. It's the only time I think that I know of, maybe you all know of something, where India and Pakistan have signed an agreement to the massive benefit of both of them. What does this agreement do? You can see it's a really dense river system. Both India and Pakistan need to irrigate. To do that efficiently, you need dams, and both of them were poor and didn't have
Oh
them.
my God.
They were going to cost $1 billion.
That.
The United States was willing to kick in half that money if they would both sign the treaty, and no terrorist event or anything derailed it. So they signed it, and this treaty has been operating some of these dams ever since, to enormous benefit of both countries. Does the United States get any enduring gratitude from either one for doing this? No, zip. Okay. Next one is the United States tried to exercise diplomacy and to convince the Pakistanis and Indians to settle their differences, and it was a total flop. And because if you're going to try to befriend both India and Pakistan, you wind up becoming the enemy of one or the other. And the United States diplomacy was based on certain false assumptions, which are, one, that India and Pakistan could be cajoled into settling their differences. And their idea is anyone who's so stupid as to think that is crazy. And if you're going, well, what are the origins of these differences? Partition was brutal. So the British colonized the Indian subcontinent, and then they left in 1947, and they left really rapidly, so that there was no time to set up any institutional framework. And also, you're talking millions of people.
Am I supposed to go down there?
So Pakistan's going to be one thing,
No.
and then
What
do I do with
India's going to be the other.
hazard?
And so Hindus are just
Oh God,
fleeing,
yeah, don't go in there.
and Sikhs are fleeing out of Pakistan, and Muslims are fleeing out of India, going back and forth, and millions are killed while this is going on. So this is the origin, at least the modern origin, of why Pakistanis and Indians are so bitter. In addition, the United States thought, well, surely the China threat is going to make the Indians come around and realize this non-aligned stuff's nonsense. Not quite. When India aligns, it aligns with Russia, not the United States. So that doesn't remotely work out the way the United States wanted. And then the United States thought, well, hey, we in the West were rich. We give Indians and Pakistanis all this aid. This will force them to be nice to us and be less nice to the communists. Wrong. India and Pakistan are really astute, and they get lots of aid from everybody. So when the great powers do align, Russia, China, us, or at least 2 of those along, then you can actually get stuff done. So that's when you get the Tashkent Agreement for the 1965 war. This is the United States and Russia both want India and Pakistan to cease and desist and stop pulling each other off the map. And also in the Kargil conflict, when Pakistan is yet again trying to resolve Kashmir by invading and then gets itself into trouble. And this guy, Nawaz Sharif, who is the head of Pakistan, he all of a sudden gets on a plane with his family. It looks like he's coming into exile, and he's trying to fly into the United States. The United States go, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you think you're doing? And says, you're not coming in here until you admit that you crossed the line of control, and then you need to get right back. And so he agrees to sign the Washington Agreement to go right back. But it's absolutely humiliating for the Pakistanis to go, oh, yeah, we went south of the line of control, and then, well, that didn't work out, so now we have to go right back. He had gone to China already and pleaded his case to the Chinese, and they told him to get right back because there was a lot of nuclear saber rattling going on, and the Chinese were not interested in nuclear war over this. So Pakistan had the choice of, okay, fight India by your lonesome, or cross back. So they crossed back. And there were other cases in the inter-Cold War period when the great powers cooperated and tamped things down, like terrorist incidents in New Delhi and in Mumbai that didn't go anywhere because the great powers told the Indians and Pakistanis to just dial it back. All right, another thing you can do is to publicly support someone.
Why is there so many
And
cameras
this
for
is
everything?
what goes on with Goa, which was a
Yeah, right.
Portuguese colony. The Indians wanted it back. The Portuguese said, no way, you cannot have it back. And the Indians took it back, and the United States supported Portugal. Why? It's a NATO ally, and we have very important bases in Portugal. So we kept the bases.
Wow,
Made
what?
the Indians
Don't I have
really
jet
angry.
boosters? I'm so
And there
confused.
are other areas of public support or
No, I
not
guess not. I don't
criticizing
know.
people
Wow, I just
publicly.
smacked my face on the ground for no reason.
Instance, in the 1971 Bangladesh war, when the United States refuses to support India by telling China, don't enter this place. But of course, it was December, so the road system would have been a little rough to even try that. But it made the Indians mad. Or if you think during the Cold War, so with Nehru, it's the 1956 Hungarian crisis where the Russians sent tanks into Hungary. The Indians don't say anything about that. There's a Berlin crisis in 1961 where the Russians are pretty rough, and the Indians don't say anything about that. And then Indira Gandhi comes in, and when the Russians send tanks into Czechoslovakia in 1968, the Indians say nothing. And then when the Russians invade Afghanistan in 79, again, the Indians say nothing. So this is one way that you make your allies feel better about things. Another thing is, if you're one of the 5 veto holders at the UN Security Council, you can do your public support that way. And I've already mentioned these Russian vetoes on Kashmiri plebiscites that the Indians truly didn't want to have happen, or short-circuiting the Indian offensive in Bangladesh. So this is what Russia did for India, and it was a very valuable thing for them. You can also put money where your mouth is, economic aid. And it's interesting, the United States provided far more economic aid than either the Russians or the Chinese, but still both Pakistanis and Indians preferred China and Russia, respectively. And some of this aid was really important. During the Bihar famine in 1967, the United States sent 20% of its wheat crop to India. It was worth $1.5 billion. That's not something to be sneezed at. For, I don't know, was it 90 million people? It's a lot of people who might have starved to death. And that didn't work out well at all because Johnson at that point, President Johnson at that point, was so mad at the Indians because from his point of view, they were cuddling up to the North Vietnamese, and the Vietnam War wasn't going well for Johnson. So he was furious. So he provided the aid, but he did it always at the last minute, ship to mouth. And Indira Gandhi was furious. She said, I don't ever want us ever to have to beg for food again. And she never did. So the United States got no gratitude for or enduring anything. Oh, and a whole other piece of it is India is not subject to famines anymore. And part of it's from the Green Revolution. And who does that? It's the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations who figure out the different strains of grains that you want to grow. And does the United States get any credit for that? No. Zip. And here is Krishna Menon, who is Nehru's controversial advisor, saying, look, we want to encourage a little competition between the donors. And they did. And India just Even Indira Gandhi, who hates Nixon, she's racking up the aid. Here's Secretary of State John Foster Dulles saying, look, concerning India and
What the fuck?
Pakistan, it's difficult to help one without making the enemy of the other. And of course, the United States tried to help both and angered both of them. Amazing. So, another instrument of national power is military aid. It is even more difficult to calibrate than the economic aid. So, you can see
Oh,
with the Pactomania event, where
The fuck am I?
Eisenhower is building
I
these
don't think I'm built up for
bilateral
this type of game.
relations and treaty organizations.
I don't have enough
to
patience to play
contain
this
the
type of game.
Russians. Formerly, there'd been
not
no
sure I do
Cold
too.
War
This
in
feels
South
very
Asia,
No Man's
but once
Sky-ish.
Eisenhower
But I kind of want to see more.
allies
I
with
feel like I'd rather
Pakistan,
play No
all the
Man's
Soviet
Sky.
nations are in there too. So that's a bit of a boomerang.
What
Another one.
ipsicles is going on
So
here?
when the United States provides military aid to Pakistan, that just drives India to seeking an alliance with Russia, which isn't exactly what the United States wanted. And then when the United States helps
Trees
India
detected
right
oxygen
after the
tank refilled, really?
1962 war with China, that alienates the Pakistanis, and then they try to buddy with China, not remotely what the United States wanted to happen. And then when the United States provides aid through the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, which is the Pakistanis and are funding things to get the Russians out of Afghanistan, they're also diverting it into Kashmir. So in 1989, this insurgency heats up, and it's remained heated ever since. And then you wind up with China providing nuclear help to the Pakistanis. So it's difficult with these things. You get a short-term thing, but then the long-term thing that winds up may not be what you want at all. The other instrument of national power, if you got one, is carrier battle group. You can send one of those around, which is what the United States did. Here's Enterprise. It was the United States' first nuclear-propelled aircraft carrier. And so during the 71 war, the United States sent this into the Bay of Bengal. The Russians sent some naval assets. Had no effect on that war. Pakistan lost, right? The Indians were furious. They just regarded this as an absolute threat, and how dare we do this anyway? And maybe it would have been better to have left Enterprise in their home port rather than doing this. And then, of course, there's sanctions and embargoes. The United States does this all the time. And if you look at the list of the times we're embargoing stuff, so at partition, we're embargoing everybody. And then during the 65 war, we're embargoing everybody. And then as various people are making nuclear progress and different things, there are these embargoes that come and go. And Pakistan's really mad because India does a test, an atomic test in 1974, and Pakistan doesn't do anything until much later. And it's looking like, why are you sanctioning us on this nuclear stuff? The Indians have actually done this. We haven't. And so if you look at this chart, you can see where the ups and downs of these sanctions go. And clearly they didn't stop proliferation because in 1998 you have these tit-for-tat nuclear atomic tests by both. And when the United States tries sanctioning, but then it's just too late. They've already tested the stuff. And so the United States basically gives up. And then after 9/11, of course, we desperately need Pakistan again to deal with Afghanistan. So it's a complicated world out there. All right, so another instrument of national power is you can trade off your territory if you really want to. Most people don't. But the Pakistanis clearly did that in 1963, and we can all speculate on what they got. I mean, my hunch would be something to do with nuclear things. But hey, it's not as if this information is out there in the public. It isn't. Oh, another thing you can do is GoFundMe insurgency. So you can, and this is done by the United States, Russia, China, India, Pakistan. Think if you got a country that you don't like, that has some minority people that want to secede, and so they're fighting there. Well, you can go fund that insurgency, and then the one you don't like is pinned because they're going to be paying attention to that insurgency. And while they're pinned there, they can't probably do things elsewhere that you might care about. So this is the logic of what's going on. So the United States belatedly decided, let's help the Tibetans. And so the CIA is helping them between 57 and 61. But look at the dates. We did the road system. The road system in Tibet's completed by 1957. It's too late. So all you do is get these people killed because the Chinese have got the road system all set up in there. So that doesn't exactly work. But for after the 62 war, all the way until 1979, when Deng Xiaoping calls it off, the Chinese are funding insurgencies of, let's see, the Mizos, the Manipuri, and the Naga people all don't like
So bad at controlling this
Indian
fucking
rule, and the Chinese are
spaceship.
more than happy to stir that pot. And the really big pot to stir are the Naxalites. It's huge, and as long as the Pakistanis who got East Pakistan, they can stir some of that up. And by the way, these Naxalites are still there in India. They have not gone away. It's a serious part of India where they are. And then, of course, Pakistan's location right next to Kashmir means they can stir that forever.
Well, that's
And
pretty.
the tragedy of these, what they become are frozen conflicts, is the outside power, if they are playing their cards right, their amoral cards right,
I bet I die.
they're not bearing any of the costs.
I ran to.
They're
Oh
pinning
no, I didn't
someone
die.
they don't particularly like. All the costs are borne by the local population, who are suffering horrendous deaths, lack of economic growth. You're having warfare where you live. What a total disaster. So that's how it works. To complain at this game. So the Indians, according to the Pakistanis, have funded the Baloch people. They straddle Iran and Pakistan, don't particularly like being told what to do. So apparently India is supposed to have put its finger on that scale. The other thing the Pakistanis accuse Indians of doing is encouraging a Pashtun insurgency up north, and that would be a way of diverting Pakistani attention.
Did I die?
from
I died
Kashmir.
again.
If they're totally busy with Pashtuns, they can do less in Kashmir.
I'm grumpy.
The result of these
I don't know.
is
I
people
just
are
flew
becoming
into
more
a
and more bitter.
giant
The hatred
sun,
just
and then
spiked.
I died.
The economic growth isn't happening.
That sounds reasonable.
It makes these problems more intractable, not less. So
I
when
thought
I
it was
think
like
about these,
kind of
frozen
like
conflicts, there are a
Inception
number
kind
of
of
ones that
thing.
you
Well,
know
not
about.
Inception. What was that?
Besides
Interstellar
Kashmir,
kind of
there's
thing.
Korea,
I
there's
bet I'm going to
Palestine.
dark black
So if you
hole, and
look
then
at
the
Kashmir,
4D
if
dimension.
I've got it right, so you fund that thing, and then what's great from China's point of view, if
There.
Pakistan is doing that, India is frozen, that it can't do other things because it's constantly paying attention to what's going on in Kashmir, as opposed to go, China, I don't know about this. Or in the Korean War back in the day, if things are all stirred up in Korea, China has to really pay attention to that, and it delays the rise of China. And in those days, that benefited Russia. But these things can change over time as to who
I didn't
the
get my suit.
beneficiary is. And then you can play this
Am I
game
stuck
and
now
think
because I
about
didn't get
how
my
it
suit?
works in Palestine. And I'm no
Dude. Oh.
expert on that part of the world, but I think this frozen conflict veto player works, that there are these veto players who are vetoing peace very easily. All you have to do is send a certain number of package bombs and peace is not going to happen. So, cutthroat billiards. What can you take away from all this? Well, common enemies cannot be conjured. So check out the alignments of who these common enemies are before you leave the parking lot. And figure it out for all possible players who might want to crash the party. Like, what's their primary objective? Who's their primary adversary? What primary theater are they truly interested in? And then you've got your hunches on how you think this is. And then you should reassess early and often to see if your assumptions are correct. And don't worry about changing your mind. Some people get really hung up about being wrong. Don't worry. Reassessing is a sign of strength. It's like, I got more information, I've changed my mind. Good thing. Don't double down on bad information.
Wait, did I die?
And if you're looking into areas of the world that are ethnically diverse, where people have been at odds for a long time,
I find this game to be very confusing.
And real difficult.
I think it's meant to be, but yes.
Part of good strategy is recognizing some problems it's not feasible to
When you
solve.
die, does your life flash
And
before
then
your
we
eyes
all
first?
have scarce resources. You can't
Okay,
do
great.
everything. Focus on those things where you think you can solve. And but if the great powers align, things can happen. And the story's even better than that. That sure, there are a few big powers, but the small.
Wait, I'm back at the very beginning.
powers,
Oh no, I have the launch codes.
add them all up. They are far. The aggregate, their aggregate wealth exceeds any one great power. So if the smaller powers agree on what they're up to, then the big powers have to pay attention, and that's a positive thing.
Before
Have
we
I
move
lost
on
all
to
that
the
progress I
interview, I
made
just want
before I
to say a
died?
quick thank you to
I don't
today's
know.
sponsor,
Maybe.
Scale AI. The AI race is the Manhattan Project for the modern age. Whoever wins reshapes the balance of global power. That's why Scale partners with the US government to fuel America's AI advantage through their data foundry. The Air Force, Army, Defense Innovation Unit, and Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office all trust Scale to equip their teams with AI-ready data and the technology to build powerful applications. Scale recently introduced Defense Llama, Scale's latest solution available for military personnel. With Defense Llama, military personnel can harness the power of AI to plan military or intelligence operations and understand adversary vulnerabilities. Whether through its work with the government or with businesses like OpenAI, Google DeepMind, or Meta, Scale is at the forefront of US AI innovation. If you're interested in learning more about how Scale powers frontier AI capabilities, go to scale.com/Dwarkesh. All right, back to Sarah.
So it seems like the lesson from this
Work
lecture, the
ash.
big lesson, is
Kinda.
we couldn't be allies with both Pakistan and India at the same time. We had to choose one. So which one should we have chosen?
Oh, well, our primary enemy was pretty much the Soviet Union for the duration of the Cold War.
Oh.
I mean, China was a problem, but the Soviets were the big problem. And so India and Pakistan never fit that bill. And so it's
I died. Okay.
it had to do
I
with
think I'm dead.
whatever the problem of the day was.
This is
and
my fourth
Pakistan
time I've died, and I
had a
find
very critical location, and so we needed it for a whole bunch of things. And you
Job.
can see how that works. So
I will say,
you
when I
need
died
them, you pay a
one
lot of
time,
money
I
to
was like,
them,
I could go to
and,
sleep now.
usually the money's worth it
Yes.
for them for the hassles of dealing with a difficult tenant. So
It's
that's
really
it.
interesting.
I
Yeah,
like it, but I don't
worked,
know.
but,
There's
I I need more of a
the relationship with
interlude,
India
like
is
something in
changing.
between.
In fact, it
I
has
need
changed
more guidance,
because
I
their
think. I
big
need
buddy,
more
Russia,
motivation to
well,
complete
after the
tasks or
Cold War,
something.
instead of
Mhm.
being the big friend, it was the big nuisance, not so much for India, but for everybody else. And now for India, its primary adversary is China, without a doubt.
Okay.
And the United States, I think, is looking that China poses the primary threat. And to the extent that both of them see it that way, that will make them align, and Pakistan less so.
It sounds like at the time it was right to choose Pakistan as the main ally for the United States.
Well, we tried to choose India too, but yeah, we tried to do them simultaneously. But India's further south, right? And so for a long time, before we got satellite imagery, you want to have listening posts and things up in Pakistan. So India just simply doesn't have the location for that. So that was the original reason for interest in Pakistan.
I want to better understand why the Soviet Union was such a charismatic example for countries that were decolonizing,
Oh.
like India.
I think go back and put yourself as a generation of what your life experience was. If your life experience was World War One, the total butchery of it. So you're telling young men your age, go, you're in a trench. I want you to go up and over the edge onto oncoming machine gun fire. We know what's going to happen when what happens, right? And they're literally in battles like the Somme. They're losing hundreds of thousands of people. I don't mean casualties. I mean dead. And so, and then you have the Great Depression afterwards. And then add to it, India's been colonized by a bunch of really opinionated white people, right? And transferring a lot of wealth out of India to England. And so you look at Marxism, and boy, it sounds plausible, right? It sounds like these evil capitalists, they're just wasting lives. And surely this is the explanation. Now, the technicalities of Marx's labor theory of value don't actually turn out to be accurate. It's not just labor that produces value. Like Silicon Valley, you understand it's what comes up here produces a tremendous amount of value. And Marxist theory doesn't recognize that. And so there are massive flaws in theory. And then when you put communism into practice, if you want to have equality, which is what they wanted, if you're going to have equality, you're not going to have any liberty, right? Because in order to make it equal, you just expropriate and then you divvy it out to everybody, and there's no liberty in that, right? And another piece about democracies, in even flawed ones, even if they have a semi-free press, a lot of the icky news bubbles up, but in dictatorships it doesn't, right? So you compare the seamy sides of some democracies that aren't doing that well, and then to the public, the PR thing that the dictatorships are presenting. So you can picture Nehru of his generation. He's sick of British, right? And so Fabian socialism, he's not for killing lots of people to impose socialism. He has a much lighter touch than Stalin.
One thing I was thinking about while you were mentioning the Gandhi and Nehru had a big problem with American segregation
Yeah.
is at the same time in the 50s, by that point, over 10% of the Soviet population had at some point been in the gulags or are currently in the gulags. And segregation is very bad. Gulags are even worse. And it's the same proportion of the population that's been in the gulags. Maybe people just didn't know about the gulags back then.
I don't think communists let you know those things, right? This is one for a lot of Russians, because my husband and I were in the Soviet Union in the 1988-89 academic year. And that's early Gorbachev, before everything totally falls apart and there's no food. So there wasn't much food, but there was some food. And it was just as the Russians were suddenly being able to read in a fairly free press about the things that had happened, and they were appalled about what had gone on under Stalin, and they just hadn't realized all of it.
One of the reasons that socialism was appealing to these decolonizing countries was because in the preceding decades, from the 20s to 40s, the Soviet Union actually had pretty good growth rates. In those 20 years, their GDP went from 8% to 18% of world production. Was that just catch-up growth? What was going on back then?
Russia? Well, there was tremendous rebuilding after World War II. There's another piece. It was so weird. When we were in Russia in 88, 89, anything that was sold at the markets that came from somewhere else, they would mark it importnaya, means imported. So the idea, and I remember thinking, this is really weird, because normally you would say it's, I don't know, Hungarian this and that or whatever. And I thought, this means that anything from somewhere else is better than what we got. That it's a really bad sign. And they had what I would call a donut empire. Normally when you think of an empire, Mother Central is the most developed part, and then there's the periphery where all the natural resources are taken away. It was an inverted empire. Russia is the donut. The rich places were places like Czechoslovakia, and Poland had been much richer places. And so the Russians are, like surf owners, are sucking in all the wealth from these places. And I think that's another reason why the shattering of the Soviet Union, when they lost all of their ensurfed Eastern Europe, why it was such a mess for Russia. They did not realize, and they still don't realize, the degree to which they were living off the wealth produced in the the European portions of Russia that since became independent.
Who was the last Soviet leader who truly believed in communism?
Gorbachev was a true believer. He did not believe it was possible to take a U-turn on the road to communism, so that when he was doing his reforms, it was to improve communism, make it better.
Gorbachev or Khrushchev?
So he absolutely believed
Gorbachev.
that.
I'm surprised.
You started your career in Soviet studies, and you're trying to figure out what's going on in the Kremlin all the time. What is the key to figuring out criminology? What is the key to figuring out what's happening in the Politburo?
Well, what I did for my doctoral dissertation, so I wrote a history of the the Russo-Chinese border when it was figured out, which is between 1858 and 1924. This is when all this territory went. And what I did is, so most of this isn't Soviet, right? It's 17 to 24 is the Soviet part. But you go to archives in Russia, you see what they'll let you see. You go to, and this is when you could go to those archives. They're closed now. And I went to Beijing, saw the archives you were allowed to see. And then in Nanjing, there were some other ones there. And then in Taiwan, the ones they would allow you to see. And then Japan, the ones they would allow you to see. And they're all lying about different things or covering up different things. So it's a jigsaw puzzle. You sort of put it together that way. So that was how I did it. And also for the whole Kremlinology is pay attention to what dictators say, because they've got to communicate at some level to their own populations. They quite often tell you exactly what they want to do, and you think, that's insane. Who would do that? Well, hello, right? So read what they have to say and read what others have to say. Then you need to read things in the Russian language. So I read a lot of things. Read broadly, read more broadly than whatever your topic is, because it's the unknown unknowns is what you're after. What are the things that are truly important I have no idea about? And the only way you get to those is archives or reading broadly, where you bump into things and ooh, that turns out to be important.
When you were giving the lecture, it seemed like these primary adversaries, whoever it is like very permanent, and there's some like deep reason why it has to be this way. But if you look at the Sino-Soviet split, it's just like they're both communist, they're both Leninist parties, and they have this falling out over. There were a couple of things you mentioned, but like it's not clear why somebody has to be somebody else's primary adversary, why you can't turn that around.
Oh, well, you can, but Russia and China have these territorial differences. And the issues I listed there of fighting to the last Chinese in the Korean War, Mao didn't really like that. There are a lot of Chinese who die in the Korean War, where the Russians sort of get them in there and then you're stuck. You have to, for prestige reasons, stay there. And the really big one I didn't discuss in any detail. So Stalin's really worried about a two-front war, Nazis in the West and Japanese in the East. And so he brokers the Second United Front between the Chinese nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese communists under Mao at a place called Xi'an in late 1930, 36. And so it's called the Xi'an incident, where Chiang Kai-shek was reputedly kidnapped and up there. But really what's going on is it's setting up this Second United Front, and then the Japanese go ballistic. And that's when they invade all the down the coast and up the Yangtze River. And that means the Chinese are fighting Japanese for you. The Japanese are not going to launch into Siberia. So that works for Stalin. But the Chinese realize this, and it's not appreciated.
Yeah, but then they helped the communists get into power in China, right?
No,
like you think they'd be grateful for that?
No, he wanted to divided China. He's telling Mao, "Oh, stop at the Yangtze, stop at the Yangtze. You need a breathing space there." And Mao's and keeps on going.
If you're the president, if you're the Secretary of State, and you're looking at this where there's these interweaving systems of alliances, and you give some guy aid because you need something and pisses everybody else off, how the hell are you supposed to keep track of this? How, do they have these matrices that you got up there? And they're
we have so many wonderful people working in the State Department. I've met a number of them because they are students at the War College. You should be proud of all the people who work for the Department of State. They're all of these different experts, different parts of the world. They get sent around hither and yon. Very thoughtful people. Also, I've read in the archives many CIA reports, because I've gone to these presidential archives, starting with the Truman administration all the way up to Bush Sr. As you get to the more recent stuff, less of it's been declassified. So I've read most of the CIA reports I've read are for earlier periods where they've been declassified. It's impressive, the level of analysis. And I know that the CIA has several there's the analytical part of it, and then there's the send people out to do. We aren't even going to talk about what they're, which is completely different. But they're very fine analysts. And then we have, like, the Department of Agriculture has very fine analysts about agriculture of the whole world. So we have a tremendous amount of expertise. And the other thing that presidents get, and also the high-level bureaucrats get, are these daily reports, where and they're very short, because they have to be, about what's going on everywhere in the world that people think is important for them to know. So there are a tremendous number of smart, well-educated people trying to get information to presidents, secretaries of states, and things. And then you have all these regional desks where there's I don't know, I can't remember exactly. I don't know the organization chart of the State Department, but you can look at it by region of the world, and people work there and provide this. So there are wonderful experts that are working on this.
You mentioned in the lecture that if China and India had figured out a way to work together, the world order could have looked completely different. Spell out the counterfactual for us. How would it have been different?
I spent the grand total of a week in India. It was a trip on the way back from Australia, and that was the amount of time we had. But we went into the Mahatma Gandhi Museum in New Delhi, and there's a whole piece of it where Chiang Kai-shek is giving him things. And it became really clear that Chiang Kai-shek had a really good relationship with India, deep respect for India, and this shared desire of, we want to be independent. We don't want Japanese running around our country. We don't want a bunch of Westerners running around. We share this with India. And so I think if you get Chiang Kai-shek winning the Chinese Civil War and things, you might have had them team up and had a much more productive relationship.
That's interesting because you often think of, like, when you hear nationalists, you think they're the ones that are really interested in territorial disputes, but in fact, they wouldn't have cared about Tibet or something. And
Well, next time you're in New Delhi, go check out the museum. But when I was there, it was like 20 years ago. But I remember being impressed. Going, wow, there's all. And then when Gandhi was assassinated, this is Mahatma, not the Indira, who's also assassinated. No relations. Um, that the nationalists sent all sorts of condolences and different things. So yeah, there could have been a different outcome.
well, I wonder if the worst thing about the non-aligned movement was that because they wouldn't fall under anyone else's nuclear umbrella, they wouldn't ally with a great power that had nukes. In order to keep up deterrence, they had to build nukes themselves, and so then you have this nuclear proliferation. And that was like it's really important to get people allied with one great power, even if it's not you, just to prevent the nukes from going wide.
I think the 1962 war made Nehru realize that non-alignment was a non-starter, and that's for the reasons you're talking about. It's like, okay, we just got eaten alive by the Chinese. Okay, we need Big Friend, and we probably need some big missiles eventually. And it's not immediately. The Indians don't come around to that we absolutely need nuclear weapons until the Bangladesh war, when China's become more of a threat.
By 1971, like, did Nehru really think that the Soviet Union might
Oh, I
start
think
the
I'm
war?
gonna
I said Nehru's dead.
You wanna
in,
do
like,
something
64,
together?
so
Yeah.
it's his daughter.
Sure, what do you want to do?
When did they
I don't
become
know.
allies with the Soviet Union?
Well, the official alliance. I'm just
Really
defining
interesting,
what an
damn.
I made up what an alliance
There's
is.
some
So
parts
I
that
would
I'm
say
really
it is the
fascinated by, and
security
other parts
pact
I just
that,
don't care for.
Indira Gandhi signs in
To be honest, the
1971.
main thing for me is
So
it's a
then
bit like
they could
Astroneer,
really
where
have
it
the
just
Soviet
feels
Union
aimless. I
before.
get that there are things to
Like,
explore and
it's
messages to
true
decipher
boredom
and
in retrospect.
stuff to
Well,
do, but
I'm
none
going
of
to
it
live one
feels
more vividly.
particularly compelling to me.
Listen,
Like,
we're
if you just want
living
to
most of
explore,
us
it's kind of
do.
cool, but
That
Yeah, I feel
it
so.
just
I
feels too
feel
freeform.
no
A,
agency, and
because
I
of
don't
propaganda,
understand
right?
what I'm
Because
doing.
they're all living beautifully,
I feel
and
a
then they're quite
reasonable
good.
amount
They're
of
very good
agency,
at
but I don't
propaganda.
understand the
So,
objectives. So, like, yeah, I don't really know what I'm
the
doing, but I could
United
figure that
States
out if
had
I had a
massive
compelling
racial
reason
problems. Think
to.
about
Hmm
1960s.
But I kind of don't, is
Martin
how I
Luther
feel.
King are
Hmm
pointing out hideous problems with this country. Civil rights demonstrations everywhere.
Um,
Anti-Vietnam
yeah,
War
what do you want to do? Do you want to try
demonstrations
Frostpunk for a
everywhere.
little bit or
The
anything?
women's movement, the
Uh,
environmental movement. There are
Doesn't have to be
loads of
Frostpunk.
unhappy people pointing out all of these
mm,
problems, which is a good thing because then the United States starts working on fixing some of these problems. Of course, they're not fixed, but there's improvement on them. Whereas
I
in
don't
Russia, no
know.
one can travel, so you
I
can't
really want to
see
play
how
an exploration type
unbelievably poor
game.
they are.
I mean, that's
And so you go
definitely
to
this.
Moscow and you think, well, this is
Not
a plausible
this, but I want to
city.
do
Well,
together, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I hear you. How is Hades 2 still in early access?
Up here. Our legs are off. I think. Okay. Terrible.
Okay, next time we talk to Grace, we have to ask, what are we supposed to do in this game? Really should play Titanfall 2, but I'm not that motivated to do it right now.
Ugh, okay. How about No Man's Sky?
I feel like it's going to be the same thing as Outer Wilds, personally.
Really?
Is it not? I genuinely don't know.
Well, I kind of enjoy uh, Astroneer more than I like. Uh,
Outer Wilds?
yeah.
Astroneer is fun because you have to like build a base and you gotta.
Put in
But then the like again, it was just
gameplay loop was left intentionally.
falling
They
short
weren't
of
sure their
needing
fan
any
base, that they were serious.
Mm.
Stuff.
do anything.
Gas giants, supersized terrestrial worlds, ice planets, ruined planets, player worlds, and turns people beautiful.
Is there co-op?
How about we play just a little bit of Don't Starve Together?
Really? You play Don't Starve?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, we got to go to sleep soonish, but we can play. Yeah, let's play a little bit. What do you think?
Let me think. You want to play Helldivers?
Oh, that sounds fun. Yeah, let's play Helldivers because there's new enemies and stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Oh, I forgot about that.
Okay, let's see. Hi. Super. Okay, I forgot how to play this game.
I don't know how to get past this fucking menu. Oh, I have to hold. Oh, okay.
Escape?
My taskbar was in the way of the escape icon thing, so I saw on your screen it said escape, so I'm tapping escape, but you have to hold it, and I can see that.
Okay. I don't know what stuff does anymore.
Me neither. We'll figure it out. Cool. Completed a major order. Another one. Another one. Another one. We get credit for all the ones since we've been stopped playing, or what?
I guess so.
How come these major orders are worth 0? 214 days ago? Okay. I invited you, I think.
Okay.
Let's not overthink it.
This is very laggy. Hold on, give me a sec.
We were two-thirds of the way through this mission, but we want to do the new stuff, right?
Yeah.
All right.
How do I join your team? Did you invite me?
Yeah, I can try to invite you again. Hold on. It's taking me through tutorial stuff that I'm skipping. I'm sure I won't get confused and complain about the game later. How about that?
Sounds good.
There's Baffles online. I don't know if he's actually in this game, is he?
I don't know.
No, I don't think so. He's just online.
He's just online.
Okay. Dark energy accumulation. Oh, we're like way behind enemy lines because of where we left off. Okay. Oh wait, wasn't there new enemies?
I don't know.
Maybe we have to do something. Monthly space station? What is that? it.
Oh wait, I was supposed to finish listening to Sarah.
I don't know what Craig's smoking. I don't know how to.
The super destroyer is ready for your next mission.
Let me
That's
look
not
it up
even a
real quick.
Oh, geez, it's so laggy.
City. Well, there is only one plausible city in the place, or maybe it's two, St. Petersburg. Or, well, it's with Leningrad in those days. So people didn't realize. But yeah, we felt we were losing the Cold War. In fact, at the very end of the Cold War, because I was in the Bush archives. So Gorbachev's in, and Bush or Reagan and Bush are thinking, well, he just looks like another one of these people. And we're not going to take the propaganda seriously. And then they started going, whoa, 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 whoa.
I guess the Illuminator gone.
And then it's in
whatever. Do you want to play anyway?
88, where Bush is going, whoa, maybe it is
That's the new
gonna
enemy,
end.
but I guess they're gone and they'll come back. Maybe it was just like a test run or something.
To do the fastest, get the Russians out of Eastern Europe ever. But
Okay, well, let's finish
Gorbachev
this
is the
thing,
one
whatever this
who
was.
wants to cooperate with the West. Oh, one thing you should know about warfare, you think the winners win it? No, actually, it's when the losers decide they've had enough. That's when a war ends. Otherwise, it doesn't end. So the Russians got sick of it, and they quit.
I wonder if there's a lesson in here for what people call the Cold War with China today, where people think, it's really competitive. China might have a bigger economy than us.
Just start near the extraction zone and then do a loop.
To see what's happening day to day in China. Maybe you might decide, like the Soviet Union, there's a bunch of things broken with it. They're not really competitive in the long run economically, and so we're going to win.
Well, I don't know, win lose, but they have a much.
I remember the turrets being very useful.
Do the math. You go,
one of us should do a backpack for both of us so we can free up spots, probably, right?
Now, but it's
huge. But
But
how do we get it? Backpack? How do you do the loadout?
Divide the 1.3 billion, whatever it is, you come up with a low number per capita.
Yeah. You scroll down.
For human beings, that's
Guard dog?
Did we have this much stuff unlocked before?
What is your family income look like? So they got a long way to go on that one.
I want to go back to Kissinger in 1971. So, because they want
I need a rocket launcher.
Somebody to send the message along to China to open up, they shut up about Pakistan's genocide in Bangladesh, where numbers vary, but somewhere between 300,000 and 3 million people died.
It's awful.
Hundreds of thousands of people were raped. I know they didn't have email back then. There was no other way to get the message across. You have to abet a genocide in order to get a message across to Mao.
Well, first of all, the Cold War is a misnomer because the bloodshed in the Third World was horrendous.
Let's not make this too hard.
I will eventually compile the stats.
Difficulty level? Yeah, probably.
Stats, but it's obscene numbers.
Shield. Maybe I just used the shield.
Congo had a civil war where literally over 10 million people died, and that's only just one of these things. So the United States cannot deal with all of these, and if you think about it, the time when the United States was really quite idealistic, the Iraq War goes in, they create democracy in this place. It's a massive civil war, and then we're blamed for it. So be careful about where you intervene, because you may not be able to stop a thing, and then you'll get blamed for what's going on.
It might be on whatever we were playing before. We're probably going to get our butts kicked.
But it is not our. You will get overextended if you intervene in everything under the planet. Also, there's a question of why the United States or anyone should be doing all of it. Shouldn't it be through the UN and other things? The really key thing was winning the Cold War. So Nixon absolutely did prioritize getting the mail through to Mao. He did. So 1971, good old Henry Hack, as he's known in the archives, Henry A. Kissinger, he gets his secret trip in there, lines up Nixon's trip in 72, and then it's going to overextend Russia in the Cold War. Why? Because with this Sino-Soviet split and all the rest of it, Russia has to militarize its entire
How do I do
border with
stratagems?
China.
How
It's
are we?
already
We're not coming in.
militarized its entire border with Europe.
Control?
Right?
Oh,
Think about this.
okay,
And you're talking about mechanized nuclear armed forces with all the tanks and everything else that goes with them. It is not cheap. Imagine if the United States had to do this on our Canadian and Mexican borders, bankrupting them. And we're a lot richer than they are. So we team up with China. We provide them all kinds of naval technology, which is not going to bother us. They give us listening posts. Again, we love listening posts. Right up on the Russian border, and the Russians are scared.
Oh,
stiff.
shit.
Are these things landing on us? What are these
Chinese have
things?
good military
so.
equipment. That wouldn't be a good thing for them.
When I was
we
president,
think we're supposed to
and he
shoot them?
built these bases in
Yeah, I shot one.
Pakistan to have the U-2 planes and go to
Yeah.
Russia. We had bases in Turkey, we had bases in Japan, we had
going
bases
on?
in a lot of other places in Europe.
I don't know.
This like marginal increase in coverage, was it really
shooting?
worth
yeah.
breaking off the alliance with India, or
I
like
don't-
pissing off India?
Oh yeah. Sorry, India.
Can we do it?
I
think
think at the
so.
time people felt we absolutely
Okay.
have to be able to.
Oh, there we
cover
go. Well, let's just
everything.
go towards
And
this
I
thing
don't
to
know
the
the
south.
details of where they had.
Oh
Their
my God,
nuclear
there's so
this
much
and
stuff
that
to do.
stored
How do I
and
switch
things
my
and all their
weapons?
testing areas, but I'm sure you needed
Uh,
to
1,
have
2,
the
3.
entire place covered.
1, 2,
And so,
3.
yeah, it was very serious.
I only have 1 and
on
2.
These nuclear weapons, they can reach.
Oh, that's right. These jammer. Oh, these things suck.
We have to kill them.
You know what? Look, before we go anywhere,
So
can we
new
take
books
out
about
like
the Cold War are coming out all the time. New books about
this?
World War II are
How
coming
do
out all
I
the
ping
time.
stuff? Can we take out that tower?
People are writing like
See
thousands
it?
of papers about this stuff all the time.
Tower in front of us?
How much new stuff are we learning every year?
Yeah, which like
All
south
these
of
scholars are
us?
still studying this.
I know.
What kinds of new things do we keep?
Front of
on
this
this?
tower?
Well,
Is that a tower right there?
There's a tower
I'm
south of us, and it's
personally
got bots
sick of
around it.
writing about World War
Right, can you
II.
see it?
I've
Oh,
done
yeah.
enough of it.
I don't have the
and
weapons to
so
deal. Okay,
I'm
you can deal with
personally
that.
not going in that
Did
direction.
you get it?
Yeah, it's endless.
I got that, yes.
Ow.
But
A lot of the books
Something
of
shooting
these
at us? What's
narrative
going on?
feel-good histories
we got a
will
lot
tell
of
you
stuff
about
around
some
us. It feels
regiment
like. Okay, hold on.
and all the heroic
Oh, we're
stuff
jammed
they
here.
did, and it's nice
Fuck.
light.
That's why it wasn't working
reading. A lot
before.
of people like that stuff. I personally like.
Oh my
things
God,
where
there's
I
stuff
learn
all
things that are
around us.
conceptual that I
I don't
can
think we're ready
then
for this
apply to
difficulty.
other
but that's okay.
problems, which
We're
those
just
books
so
don't
slow
help me,
because
but
we're
that's
trying to
just
figure
me.
out how to.
How do you
Yeah,
decide
yeah,
which
yeah.
history books in
Ah.
return?
Good
You're
question.
just on Amazon. You can't like read it yet. You're just like looking at it on Amazon.
Well, it's hard. What I would say is give it a book.
Dropping a turret that hopefully won't
What's that? If the
backfire
book's
on
about
us.
another part of the world, flip to the bibliography, which you can do on Amazon, and zing through there for about 30 seconds.
No.
And see, is there anything in the language of the country in question in the bibliography? Like how much? And if there is zip,
C to
I would
crouch if you want
pause
to do
it.
that.
Okay.
how much?
Okay.
I'm curious.
Woo!
How many of you would be interested in reading a book that says it knows everything
How do I
about
kill
the United
myself?
States
X?
and there's not a single English
Oh, I
source
don't know.
cited?
Stims? Yeah, I
I
completely
think
forgot
you
about
regard
those.
The book is garbage. And then Americans do this routinely, and it's a problem
How
with
do I
political
stim?
science degrees, where it would be very easy to require anyone who's going to do a
Oh, I'm
specialty
jammed
in
here.
comparative politics or IR,
Oh
international
no, it's
relations,
those
that,
big
hey,
fuckers.
you need to
How do
pass a
you
language
stim
test, and don't
yourself?
try Spanish if you think
You
you're going to
think
talk about the
maybe?
Middle East.
No.
Right? If it's going to be Middle East, it better be something like Arabic, Farsi, Turkish.
Oh, look, it's a big
Hebrew,
puppy.
and
Hi,
better
big
yet,
puppy.
If you're really going to be a
Oh, did
serious
we kill
Middle
it?
Eastern expert, try all four.
I don't know. Big puppy?
Apparently.
Also,
that
how
would
do
be
you
true
stim?
expertise.
Oh no.
And where you can read books
I got it.
in
V.
the
It's V.
language and
Okay.
get what other
Okay,
people
cool.
are thinking about things.
Okay, we're getting there. We're
So that
figuring
would
it
be
out.
My basic is
Get
for
that
the
autocannon
people
turret.
who
It's
aren't
really
playing
good mark.
half-court tennis, all about Team America. Get to the other side of the net and try and figure out what other people are thinking. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it means you are making the effort to see where they're coming
Oh,
from.
thank you.
During the Cold War, all these proxy wars, was it good that we were just like letting off steam in these smaller
Oh, shit.
ways, and that, therefore we could avoid the bigger Great War?
It wasn't letting off steam. It was horrendous. I don't know the answer. In fact, my current project is a history of the Cold War, and I've read a lot of things, and I will combine. I'm going to compile a lot of tables on things like this, of just putting the data together. It'll take a long time, but then when you get the table, it'll be a really quick skim. So if you've got a civil war churning somewhere in Latin America or somewhere in Africa, so no one's aiding it, fine. Then if you have Russia puts its finger on the scale, then of course we're going to put our finger on the scale.
What is
So
going
that
on?
means the Russians are providing industrial age weapons. We're providing industrial age weapons. What happens? Casualties just go through the roof. And that's what went on through the Cold War. And then there's magical inter-Cold War period when all that stopped. And
I
that's
have
when
a
you get this
bad tendency to
tremendous growth
reload from
across the
Overwatch.
Third World
I
because,
know, and I'm
there
wasting
aren't
ammo
these
too.
insurgencies just tearing up wealth. And then you could see recently, look at North Africa. It's a mess right now, right? It's both ISIS or whatever it is in there is doing its stuff, and then you have Wagner Group or whatever they are in there, and then you
Okay, I
have the
need to give you a
Chinese further
backpack, but I don't know
south,
how to do
and
that right
I have
here.
a
everybody's stealing
backpack, don't worry.
everything. You got silver
have a
all
rover.
over
Okay.
the place. And then that means
Probably
military
not very
age
useful against these
males
machines.
want to get out because people will kill you, right? Or they'll either dragoon you into fighting where you don't want to fight, or they'll just kill you outright. So they're all trying to get into boats to Europe, which is destabilizing. It's a mess.
Oh, you got a
We're
cool
in the
backpack.
Second Cold War, and this is part of it.
What was the
All right,
biggest?
let's try to
when
get
you're
in
doing
here.
This project in the Cold War. What were like the biggest miscalculations that people were making? Were they too suspicious of the other side? Were they not suspicious enough? Were they like too concerned about basis and or what,
I don't know.
what were
I
they
need
missing?
to,
Oh,
I
shit,
need to
what was
think
that?
more about that because I think there are probably all sorts of
Okay,
things.
okay.
And
G,
also,
G,
it's
G.
impossible
Oh.
to know the right thing to do. And then afterwards, when it pans, you go, well, that was a mess. It's hard to know. But I think it was probably a terrible mistake when Eisenhower thought, here's the Supreme Command, Allied commander of World War II, who knows all
Shit.
about hot wars, doesn't want to do that. When the United States deposes Mossadegh in Iran in 1954.
What
I
the
could
hell
see
is going
Eisenhower's
on? It's
view.
just
Hey, look,
chaos.
Ah,
this is
there's
one guy,
more.
and we're
There's
gonna
more
avoid
behind me.
The Russians taking oil fields here, etc. And he thinks that's
I
a
just
better
want this
trade-off.
stupid
Well,
thing
the
gone.
Iranians have
Ugh.
never forgotten that. They're
Oh,
furious
okay.
to this
Whoa,
day.
whoa,
Wouldn't
whoa,
you be if
whoa,
you're
whoa.
Iranian? Mossadegh was
Oh no.
democratically elected.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Or
Oh,
Hi,
I,
oh, hi, honey bun.
Actually,
You just
Vietnam,
disappeared, honey bun.
we didn't want to hold. we
run!
didn't
Just
push
run
the South
for it.
Vietnamese
I
to
don't
hold
know where.
elections because we knew Ho Chi Minh.
I don't know. This is a disaster.
only
This is fun though,
national
but
figure.
yeah, we're gonna.
Vietnam. So the United States.
We're
is
not
all
going this
about
way
free
anymore. Where are we
elections.
going?
The
I don't
Vietnamese
know.
could have run a free election, and Ho Chi Minh would have won. That was our assessment that he would win. Okay. Well, if you're for free elections, it means you don't get to
Liberty!
and I wonder if
I forgot to play this
that
game.
wasn't a terrible mistake.
Me
Why
too.
is just stratagems just constantly, where am I?
So they
Oh,
were
thank you.
always going to be a counterbalance to the Chinese. But due to the McCarthy era, we'd purged all of our
Yeah,
China
get behind
experts, all
something
these
and-
children of missionaries who knew a great deal about China,
Going
less
for
so
that.
about Vietnam, but at least it's a related cultural group. So we had gotten rid of all that expertise in the McCarthy era. So we're running blind.
Oh, look, there's
into
a.
it.
Oh, hey, hi.
Oh, it's a
What you were
dog.
mentioning
Keep
about
running.
the
I don't know
fact
where
that
we're going.
I don't know where we're going
curtail what
either.
kinds of elections you can hold in these countries. After Germany and Japan surrendered, if they tried to elect another fascist
Jesus.
party, we wouldn't have been like, all right, well, that's what you guys voted for. They're in charge now. We would have, and so
Would you like to restart on a different difficulty?
Because
I did tell you to go down a little bit on difficulty.
I didn't know when that
we've just been fighting a
decision was made, but I guess it was still on some other difficulty. I thought it was
We're going to let the
actually
Germans
company.
and Japanese decide
Let's,
everything initially.
What's the board?
But what we did do
You know what?
for both
This
Germany,
Don't Starve starting pretty good.
West
No, I thought
Japan,
that was actually
is
pretty
we
fun
did our
personally,
best to
but
set
Okay.
up democratic
let's
institutions.
definitely go
that
down to
within a
difficulty.
cycle or two, they're making their decisions whom they're
What is
electing.
going on?
We are not choosing their leaders.
Major order completed. Why are
And
you
it was a
spamming me
very
with major order
generous
completed?
peace. It was
I don't know. Does
realizing
that
in
mean
World
care
War
we could use?
ostracizing Germans,
Maybe, yeah.
ostracizing Russians. It's probably doesn't. You need to bring them back into the
There
family
it
of
is.
nations because they're on the planet. They're not
Down one
leaving the planet.
difficulty or two?
And the generous
Yeah.
peace with Germany. Look at them; they're the most wonderful allies, as are the Japanese. They're
Go down
terrific.
two.
During the Cold War, the USSR is constantly funding these communist parties around the world. And these parties are doing like exactly their bidding. Whatever Stalin says, they'll do.
I don't know
Or-
about that.
Well, yeah, feel free to clarify. But it doesn't feel like any other country managed to pull this off. There's not like an American party in the French Parliament that does exactly what the president would tell them to do.
No,
How'd they pull this off?
I don't think it's that they did exactly what anyone wanted. What the communists have is a really powerful doctrine for how you go from nothing to something in a failing state, how you start out with a bunch of people on some campus. Mao literally starts out as a junior librarian in Beijing University. So I don't know, he's there with the librarians, I don't know, the ladies, who knows what it is. It's probably guys in those days. And then he's turning these people into cadres and eventually to guerrillas and eventually conventional army. But they have a really good program that works the world over, and it's very effective for taking power within a broken state. It's lousy at producing prosperity thereafter, right? And you look at the Communist Party today, they're really good at staying in power. For a while there, under Deng Xiaoping, it ran in parallel what the economic reforms needed to be to produce
Okay.
wealth and
You
what
ready?
the
Let's go
party
try this
needed
mission.
in order
Okay.
to be more powerful. But now that's running at cross purposes, because for the party to maintain its monopoly, well, all these much more
Are you gonna
educated
get a
Chinese aren't gonna be
pack of your
interested in
own?
that anymore.
Uh,
And so it's
I
time
guess
to lock
so.
those people up, and then you're gonna have trouble
I don't know.
with
I don't know what we're supposed to be
keeping your,
bringing
your
down.
economic growth rate going.
Mao
I'm
dies,
gonna
and
try this back.
immediately things improve. China experiences its growth trajectory. Stalin dies, and Khrushchev's not a teddy bear, but at least you like cut down the Gulag system. And so it does seem like if you have an especially bad dictator, you do have this sort of regression to the mean, where the next guy's probably not as bad as the worst guy who's ever been in charge of the country. And I wonder if that implies that if we got rid of Kim Jong-un or the Ayatollah or something,
There you go.
the next guy probably won't be as bad.
I don't know, but I think iconic leaders like Mao and Stalin, they were canonized by winning their wars. Stalin, by winning World War II, the Russians revered him for doing that. And they had experienced, every Russian experienced World War II. It was central to their lives to win that thing. So Stalin is canonized
Is
for
that
doing
two
that. And Mao, the man who put
weapons?
Humpty
Don't those
Dumpty back
conflict? I
together
think you can
again
only have
when
one of
no
those
one else
equipped at a
could,
time,
and
can't you?
then
I think
fights
so.
the great powers.
I can't use the
Temple's
one that you
powers to a
picked.
stalemate in Korea. He's again
Which
been
one? Quasar?
canonized. Whoever
The
comes
heart.
after them is not going to have.
Oh,
that
no, I
legacy.
mean the two blue
It's just going
weapons.
to devolve.
Aren't those
That's
both in your
period.
number 3
And then,
slot?
for the
Oh, right.
successors
I
of
could be wrong, but I
Stalin,
think you can only
they
use
were
one of
sick
those
being
at a time.
terrified about
You are
whether they're going to be
correct.
purged. He kept putting bullets in people's heads, like Vladimir Putin. You do this long enough.
Get a backpack,
that
or you could
people
wait
are
until I can
horrified
give you a
and
backpack.
don't want to have it.
In fact, I'll give
They
you the
don't wanna
first
live
backpack
that
if I'm the
way
only one with
anymore.
backpacks.
Sure.
So
Okay.
there's that piece of it as well.
Cool.
I guess I'm not sure the answer is. Like, if you found out tomorrow that Putin is dead, is your estimation that things are going to improve or get worse?
My estimation in that kind of system is there's going to be a leadership struggle. That's the problem with dictatorships. They're absolutely brittle, and that's what's wonderful about having elections. You just, every 4 years or whatever it is, you have an election. Whoever it is going to be whatever it is. But in these dictatorships, no one knows. And so Stalin literally, I think he didn't show up at breakfast. No one wanted to open the door. And then probably they decided, let's not open the door. Let's just let that door stay shut for a few days. And then when it starts stinking, well, no, perfect.
I'm going to drop a
So,
cannon here that's going to
that's how
piss some
he
things off.
dies.
Come grab this backpack before
So you're going to be
forget.
guaranteed a free-for-all. So if there's a free-for-all for something like Ukraine, they will probably have to call that off because they got to focus on Moscow. That's what happened with the Korean War. Why is the Korean War? And Stalin dies. Russians want it over because they got all kinds of unrest. It's various prisons in their own
Near
gulags.
near me, if you can see that. Ow!
They're having, I think, some Bulgaria, maybe East Germany as well. And they got problems.
Hold tab if
So
you
they
want
don't
to
wanna
see
deal
where
with
I'm
Korean
at.
War
Did you
anymore.
get the
Who
backpack,
cares?
or is
Forget
it?
about it.
Yeah, I got the
So you would be
good.
guaranteed that, which might be highly beneficial for Ukraine. But knowing Putin, he's an evil man. He'll probably stick around forever.
While you're studying this Cold War history, do you, how close did we get to a nuclear bomb? Some people argue that, like, there were all these close-in dissidents. It basically should have
Oh.
happened almost in the sense of
you
the
having-
odds.
Oh,
And some people say like, it wasn't mad work. It wasn't
What
going
is
to happen.
shooting
Why
me?
would they risk a first strike?
Oh, it's a miracle we're all here. I think in the Cuban Missile Crisis, it came down to Soviet subcap. They had like the political commissar, the military commissar. I have to reread this, but I don't know whether you needed a vote of 2 out of
Thank you.
3 to launch a nuclear weapon, or whether one guy was senior and you have to get him to come along. I have to read the data, but basically, someone put their foot down in the Soviet sub not to launch a nuke. Okay, we lucked out of that
Hey,
one.
we got one.
And then I think
at
under
that.
Reagan, there was an Able Archer missile test, or we were doing a war game or something, and the Russians looked at it and thought it was the real thing for a while. And that just scared the bejesus out of them. And then I think it was after that that Ronald Reagan started moderating his rhetoric. He's like, whoa, you don't want to have them on the edge like this. This is not going to be beneficial. So it was quite close. The advantage in the Cold War is all our leaders, all the way through Bush Sr., were all veterans of World War II. In one way or another, they'd served. Some of them on the battle line, like Bush Sr. had,
What is that?
and others
what?
near enough, so that they understood how
Oh,
dangerous
no!
it was. And like
They're
all the Soviet
burning.
leaders, Brezhnev,
What the hell?
those people had,
So
had
confused.
seen all sorts of people be
Get a
butchered.
chance.
So they were
No rush.
cautious in a way I don't think Vladimir Putin
God, run.
is.
Run!
Going back to the lecture, if it's true that you
Let's
can't get
go!
primary adversaries to be friends with each other, and if you want to be friends with one of them, you're going to be
Them.
enemies of the other one. I mean, the world is full of people who are enemies
No,
of
no,
each
no,
other.
don't die, don't
Does that
die,
mean
don't
that
die.
at once America can only be friends with half the world, and it's got to be enemies with the half that this half
No.
hates?
I don't. With India and Pakistan, it was so intense because of partition, of so many people who died, and it was recent, right? 47, and so you wouldn't expect those animosities to die down, and also their new states trying to
You okay?
establish their legitimacy. So that was particularly difficult. I don't know that most countries in the world are
There's
necessarily want
right
to
behind
kill
me.
all of their neighbors, and then you can look at things forever. Britain and France were going at it, and then Germany became the primary problem between World War I and World War II. So then Britain is teaming up with France, its former primary enemy, and that whole problem goes away. And then you have the generous peace after World War II, not one. World War
I have
I
no
was
ammo.
not a generous peace. And
was a
with the
resupply thing right
mismanaged
there that we
Great
just
Depression
passed.
that allows fascists to rise all over the place. But after World War II, generosity to the Germans, it's over. Look at Europe. If you study European history, they're all trying to butcher each other for centuries, and then they realize, what a waste. Let's just trade, play by the rules.
Should we have cut off Lend-Lease aid to Stalin after 1943
The hell
when
did
it's
I-
obvious that
Bad idea.
when
Gotta
it's
go get
obvious
my
that
stuff
they're
drop shipped,
winning
so
against the
no.
Germans? If you'd done that, then
Hope
they
you
would
get
have
my-
stopped advancing as fast in Eastern Europe.
Oh, is that what you're thinking? No, no.
More of Europe could have been free earlier on.
No, because you're assuming that World War II was not a closely run thing. I think it's a much more closely run thing than you think. And there's no one's sure of how it's going to turn out. Everyone knows if it goes longer, it's more of my kids
are
who
we
are
going?
dying. So there's no way
I'm just trying to
you are
fend
going
off.
to cut
Trying
aid
to get my
to
gear for one
the
thing.
army that's fighting World War II. All right, here's a concept for you. There's a main theater in the war. How do I know what the main theater is? That's where most of the people fighting are. That's the main front, main theater. Russians fought between 2/3 and 3/4 of the Nazi army always. That makes the Eastern Front the main theater. So you all think that Normandy invasion was a big deal. No, that is a peripheral operation. It is peripheral to the main theater. And if the Russians hadn't been doing Bagration, this big operation that coincides with Normandy, no way would we ever have gotten on to the continent, and that's in 1944. So cutting Lend-Lease aid.
Oh, our
insane.
resupply is marked on
But
the map now.
You're eliminating the problem of fascism until people have forgotten what fascism meant, but you're left with the problem of communism.
By that same logic, look, the main theater in the Pacific War was in China, where most of the fighting was
Yes.
happening. Our Lend-Lease aid to Chiang Kai-shek
On my way
was
to
1
you
to 2%
eventually.
of what we're sending to Stalin.
Yes.
In today's dollars, we send Stalin $1 trillion worth of aid. Just tremendous amounts of supplies he used to then instill a communist totalitarianism on Eastern Europe. If we had sent a fraction of that aid to Chiang Kai-shek and help us with the Japanese, maybe we would still be in power. We wouldn't have to fight as
We
much.
couldn't get it in. It's because if you want to deliver Lend-Lease aid, this is the problem in World War I. It's why did Russia fall in World
you
War
okay?
I? Why would you ever let that happen? There's no way to get the aid in because Russia hadn't built its Murmansk Railway, which goes way up north, and it hasn't completed the Trans-Siberian Railway. It doesn't do those things until Murmansk is early into 1917, and the Trans-Siberian's 1916. That's like right before the Tsar falls. And so couldn't aid Russia in World War One. It falls for lack of arms. And then the blockade that the Japanese did was really effective. So to get aid in, you need railways
Right.
and you need ports. The Japanese had covered all that, and they owned all the railway systems. So the only way we could get stuff in is we're flying over the hump, the Himalayas. Okay, so you're going to fly in aviation fuel plus the airplanes, and then
There's
you're
stuff
going to
all
try
over
to
the
bomb
place.
Japan from
Yeah, we got to get rid of
China.
some of these.
Imagine flying in aviation fuel.
Oh, shit,
It's like a
big guy.
non-starter. And
mean,
I think the best
reasonably big
argument
guy.
you can make is on that is that rather than getting Chiang Kai-shek to do the Burma campaign,
You get him?
43, 44, and he was dead
Like, you
against
bought
it,
dropped
is
the
let
tick,
him
dude.
keep all that equipment, whatever you got over the hump, instead of sending it over to Burma, which is strategically irrelevant, turns out, in this war. Let him keep everything, because when the Japanese try
another
to do
auto
Ichigo, it's their biggest offensive of the war. They're going right down through central China because the United States is cutting off so much of their maritime stuff. They want to be able to have railways all the way through central China. Anyway, Chiang Kai-shek gets wrecked in that. Maybe if more of the equipment had been available
I
to
remember
him,
these quests
maybe,
being very confusing.
he would have been
I
in
remember it's
better
difficult at
shape
the beginning,
to
and it
then,
gets easier.
put on a
I'm
better
just gonna loot
showing in the
this.
Civil War. Also, not look to the Chinese people as like a serial loser. And it's not his fault. It's because he's an unindustrialized country trying to deal with the Japanese, whom we found very difficult to fight. So why wouldn't he find them difficult?
Is that?
But we kept Lend-Lease
You're on
going
our
even
landing zone. Oh
after
no, you're on one of
Putin
the
had
quests. Okay, I'm
fallen.
coming.
And Stalin used that aid in order to, even after the first atomic bomb is dropped, only then does Stalin break the non-aggression pact with Japan and invade Manchuria. So he basically had no moral right to Manchuria. It was the Chinese who had been doing all the fighting.
Yeah.
And he gets Manchuria.
Yeah.
Should have stopped the Lend-Lease by then, right? Just like make sure
Well,
the Chiang Kai-shek.
I think we stopped it very rapidly at the end of the war. So, yeah, the British were appalled how rapidly the Lend-Lease aid stopped because they desperately needed it
You're
because they'd
doing
been wrecked
that.
by the war. So, yeah, we did cut it
Oh,
off.
bots
But
are coming
I
in.
don't, you definitely want Nazi Germany gone, and you want to keep supporting Russia until that happens.
Can I try another idea on you?
What do you? Yeah.
So it seems like one of the big achievements of modernity is that we get countries to stop caring about history. The idea is like, look, if you hear people talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on both sides, they'll go back like 2,000-3,000 years about who has rights. On the Tucker Carlson interview, Putin was talking about things that happened in like 500 BC. And then so the big achievement is just like, look, the past is the past. Whatever the borders are right now, we're gonna enforce those. We don't care who like claims to have rights to it because of what happened in 1700s or something.
That is modern international law. And I don't know when, you'd have to be a lawyer, it's probably a lawyer in who actually knows of when you decide modern
Go
international
to the
law
next.
begins. But certainly by the time you're getting through world wars, we're in modern international law. And that's the problem with what Putin's
We're going
his
east,
magic
right?
is working on Ukraine, is they signed multiple times
I
at
don't
the
know where to
breakup of the
go. I'll follow
Soviet Union, and then afterwards what Ukraine's borders were.
Tab,
and
and
they're
you can see
violating
where we're
all
going.
of
I don't know. My turret's
well,
killing
have fun
things,
with
so
it
that's
because
cool.
the Chinese can play that game in reverse on Siberia, and we'll see how happily that one ends. But I think there is a realization that these disputes go back forever.
I'm ready for the
And
drop
it's like musical chairs. We're now freezing.
Okay.
Whatever chair
Go
you're
east.
in,
Where are
that's
you?
it.
Why? Oh, you're right
And
here.
that's
Okay, cool.
modern international law.
Why are you always
And
yelling
it turns
at
out that those
I'm not
countries
yelling.
that focus on territory
There's a
or
little
ripping
thing
it
out
off
there.
from someone else, or
Yeah, let's go to that.
it's negative sum. You're going to fight over it. You're going to destroy it in the process, whatever. And the Europeans are a great example to us all of just call it a day. Let everybody travel. Go get a rental property somewhere, right? And run your businesses. You really don't need to own Luxembourg or whatever it is. And what a hassle. You want to offload
Just
their
go for
crazy
the
domestic
I
problems
guess.
anyway and just run your transactions. This is the miracle of the rules-based order. It is the only way
You
to
got 'em back
have
Is you?
a
Yeah, I got one
compounded,
too.
rapid compounded growth. You go, well,
that
how's it
doesn't fuck-
possible that China had this
Big
rapid
guy.
growth for a while and they're a dictatorship? How'd that work? It's because they had the growth when they cooperated with the international order, when they rejoined the family of nations. Yeah, that's when they prospered. When now Xi Jinping is going to do a U-turn on that. Have fun. We will not be enriching.
You mentioned in the lecture that the real motivation for the CCP is to keep itself in power. It's not a democratic system. And if keeping yourself in power doesn't align with making your country rich and therefore staying in the international order, if that is a correct mental model, then like, what's the pitch to Xi? You know, like, why should he abide by the international order? Because we want him to abide by the international order, right? And if the idea is like, well, it's not going to work out for you, like maybe
I don't think it will work out for him or for the Chinese people.
That's not a great sales pitch.
But yeah, but there are things that you just cannot convince other people. Another key thing in strategy is
if you just
you
want
can have
to
a very worthy
just do
goal.
right here.
You need to look at it carefully and go, is it feasible? I don't think it's feasible to make Xi Jinping change his mind because he's of a particular background and this is what he believes. And he has a whole bunch of other Chinese people around him who believe the same thing. And we're going to a second Cold War. It's going to be a long wait till they change their mind. If you think about Gorbachev's generation, they decided, Gorbachev said over and over again, we cannot live like this anymore. That the realization is that their standard of living was lousy compared to the West. So clearly they needed to reform and do things. But that was his decision and his generation's decision to reassess and do something else. It's going to be a long wait until the Chinese reassess or the Russians reassess. So then you have to think about protecting yourself and working with allies, your friends.
In the first Cold War, the Sino-Soviet split, getting China to oppose the Soviet Union was a big deal in terms of winning that war. Who plays the role that China played in the first Cold War against China?
Oh, they still played. It's interesting. So,
look out.
Putin Russia lost, the Soviet Union fractured at precisely the time that China's rising. So during the Cold War, China's really weak and Russia's in the dominant position. Well, I guess that's reversed. So Putin is dumping all his ordnance on Ukraine, his Cold War stockpile. And he is leaving Siberia wide open to Chinese predations. And I believe Siberia has precisely the resources that China covets on lands the Tsars stole. And I think there's a big body of water out there called Lake Baikal. It's 20% of the world's surface fresh water. China is chronically short of fresh water in North China. Baikal is the only fix, and I think it's flat enough that you could pipe it around. So I don't think the question is it's not the question of whether the Xi-Putin bromance is going to end. It's when. And I assure you the Chinese will pick the moment that is least convenient for Putin.
You think they'd actually go to war about it, or would they just negotiate the land?
I bet it'll be negotiation of just you get them in a corner and say, "Okay, buddy, this is what we want. This, and then he'll want some things from them." And
it sounds like what Zhou and Lai tried to do to Nehru.
I'm just gonna drop it right here and keep running, but there's stuff.
What do you mean, Zhou and Lai absolutely got the Aksai Chin plateau. Yeah, he offered the deal to Nehru. Nehru wouldn't take it. It's like, okay.
Holy shit.
What is that?
I don't think, given they both have nuclear weapons, I don't think that kind of play is probably the play to make. But as long as he's desperate for whatever, for ordnance and other things,
at least.
Putin's getting himself into a grand old corner.
You wrote a textbook about Chinese history from 1644 onwards. In Silicon Valley, there's this community called Progress Studies, and they're very interested in why the Industrial Revolution happened, how to increase growth, what is the history of progress in life.
Is that yours?
And one big question is, why didn't China have the Industrial Revolution first? In 1750, they had much higher fraction of the population, much higher fraction of the world output. During this period, why didn't they have higher growth rates and come up with all these technologies?
Well, there are whole books on the subject that I haven't read that look into this, but I would flip it around and go, well, the Industrial Revolution starts in Europe. That's the unusual thing. So the question isn't why China did it, why Europe did. And I have some guesses, but there are very thoughtful books on this subject. You can go find them and have fun reading them. But if you look at Europe, it's a peninsula, and then it's got the Mediterranean there. And so the Europeans, and they've got quite a very good river system, the Danube and the Rhine and the Ruhr.
Where's all my stuff?
Different rivers. And so they have have always been
It's like
a
somewhere
lot
here.
of trade going on. And then no one's ever been able to make a big empire in Europe stick. The Romans did quite well for quite a bit of time. Napoleon tries, not so good. Nazis, not so good at all. And I guess the French tried on and off, and it didn't succeed. So you have all of these
Yeah,
Yeah,
competing
help me.
countries,
No,
and
help
I
me.
think a
Where did
lot
you
of
go?
that was essential to the Industrial Revolution of having.
Not very far.
You're focusing on commerce,
Then
and
you should be able to help me.
you've got a lot of competing places. So you don't have one
Get your stuff?
big empire.
I don't
You
know.
can
I'm
just
just.
sit there, be
Dude, I'm
fat,
just.
dumb, and happy.
It's around the
That you have to
puppy.
innovate in order
see
to
it.
survive
I'm
against
coming
all
back.
these other little states.
Earlier, we were talking about how in North Africa or the other regions, there's been a bunch of chaos because people are constantly
I
there's
saw it.
insurgencies,
This is your
there's
stuff.
civil wars, there's
Oh,
these
there's more stuff.
smaller wars happening
right
all the
here.
time, and that causes chaos. But if you look at Europe throughout this period, you know, these countries are constantly at war with each other, and the fact that because of that, no one big empire forms apparently helps explain the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, there it
So you know,
Right.
it seems to imply that we should see like a bunch of growth in North Africa or something.
Right, it's
You have
a
a backpack?
tremendous innovation, and you look at things long prior, like Michelangelo and things, Leonardo da Vinci. It's just a lot of these really
Sure,
bright
it's in the same
people.
spot.
Yeah, it's my guess is it's related to all
started?
of this, and I think the Industrial Revolution doesn't begin in England.
Sure.
And
Well, we're aggroing
the,
stuff,
the
we like
Industrial
that.
Revolution isn't strictly industry. Yeah, it's about textiles and steam engines and railroads and things, but it's also about institutions. One of the big things for the British was insurance,
Start it?
Aircraft.
so
Oh,
that when you do
no,
your trading
let's
vessel,
restart
the
it.
whole thing
Activate.
sinks.
We're right
Oh,
here.
sorry, it's right
You
there.
don't bankrupt
Sure.
all your investors because you've got that
There's
boat
some
insured.
big
And
robots
then
there that I'm tempted to
banking
shoot
rules,
at.
so you can't just
Good.
rip off everybody's cash. And so Britain, because it's surrounded with
Oh.
the moat,
Good.
becomes a
them.
banking center, and because
Free,
it's
but doesn't help.
unlikely in a war to have
Oh
some
no,
alien
get away from
army
my
come
turret.
and just open all the vaults and take everyone's money. So
Oh
my
there's
God,
these
did we stop the-
institutional things. And then the British trading countries, like the Dutch Empire, want to be able to trade in peace. So they want people just follow laws. So it's not surprising the founding father of international law is a member of the Dutch Republic, Hugo Grotius. And so it's all it's this gravitation.
turrets.
The Romans are gravitating towards law and institutions, and then these competing places so no one controls. I think the question is what's special about Europe rather than why it should have been somewhere else.
What's mysterious about China is not only that it doesn't have the Industrial Revolution first, but
match.
its development starts so slow. So Japan copies Western institutions during the Meiji Reformation and industrializes almost a century before China is able to do the same thing. And look, they're communists for a while, so it makes sense that during the Mao period or during the Civil War, that would impede development. But even during the Qing Dynasty or something, it takes
this
until
year I tried to do the
1980
bonus
for them to start
objective on the way
development.
back.
That just seems
Huh?
awfully slow.
Go do the bonus objective on the way out after this.
Sure.
Well, communism is a really lousy system, so they did that. In the 19th century, they have all these peasant rebellions where they're literally losing tens of millions of people that are just devastating the country. So that's why the 19th century is a lost century of all of that going on. So it's hard. And then there's another piece that's hard for the Chinese. If you've been such a successful civilization in Asia the way they had been, they were the center of everything culturally, science, governmental institutions, you name the area of human achievement, and the Chinese were at the top of it all in Asia. With that kind of success, it's pretty hard to reform yourself. And so they also fed themselves the Kool-Aid that the Chinese never absorbed foreign ideas. It was always foreigners absorbed their ideas. And of course, that's nonsense, because they were conquered by Manchus and actually absorbed a lot of Manchu institutions, but that's not the story they're telling.
How was that?
Whereas the Japanese are well aware they're absorbing Chinese institutions originally, Western institutions later, and so that isn't antithetical to who the
That's it.
Japanese
And I'll
are.
head out.
That's interesting.
Let's go east
Past
of the bonus
civilizational
objective.
greatness may be an impediment to development.
Yeah, it's hard. Well, also because the way they define civilization, there's only one. Everybody else are barbarians. People come and kowtow to China. Okay, great. But this doesn't set you up to
can-
learn from
We've
others.
got this little anti-aircraft
One of
thing.
the big dichotomies you talk about is the difference between limited and total objectives. How does Bismarck illustrate the value of having limited objectives?
Limited and unlimited objectives. Yeah, Bismarck does illustrate that. An unlimited objective is, the simplest way to look at it is regime change. So if I have an unlimited objective against you, I win the war, you're going to be out of power. And as versus I win the war and yeah, you lose a province, but you'll be in power. So what Bismarck does, he's very clever. Well, he's operating in an age of kings, and it actually his achievements illustrates why you truly don't need royal families running the show.
Oh yeah,
It's
I
breathtakingly
guess so. I guess we got to call down.
So initially, he fights the Danish War, so
Try
that's
that.
way up north, and it's over these two provinces, and he wants to set his fingers on the scale of the more northerly province, because
Okay.
then that'll give
Easy.
him the rights to march troops, I think, through the more southerly
the
one to
extraction
cause
zone's
up
so
problems
close.
later.
Like
So
right
war
here.
number
Yeah,
one's
do you
the
want to
Danish War. No one
turn
thinks
another
too much
next, or you
about
just
it.
want to go?
Prussia gets an
Whichever.
extra province as part of Denmark.
Let's
Was
clear one
part of
more.
Denmark, no big
Sure,
deal.
be fast
But
up
then
here.
he
Then we'll
fights the
Where are you?
go. What time do
Austro-Prussian
we have?
War,
Go north.
and then what he's
I don't know. How do you
after
check?
is
I thought there was a
all these
clock.
little
somewhere. I
Germanic
can't see it.
states, and Austria had dominated a bunch of them, and in that war, a whole bunch of them, as a result of that war, he collects a whole bunch of these other states, and no one is really paying attention that he's actually upending the balance of power in Europe. They're just looking at it. It's limited. He's not toppling the Austrian government. He's not toppling the Danish government. And then he fights the Franco-Prussian War, where he takes
Gonna-
Alsace-Lorraine, which are these provinces. If you look at it, it's like a salient into one country or the other. He takes that, and the French never forgive him, and that leads into World War I later. But by the time it's over, he's overthrown the balance of power in Europe. All
Well,
of a sudden, Germany, Prussia, which was the weakest of five great powers, suddenly has a central position, the Germanic states, and it owns the whole thing. And Britain and others who
made
were
it.
asleep at the switch,
hey,
like, ooh, because they could have weighed in on the scale
Is
at
that
any
it?
point in these things.
that's
to
it for that
alter
one. Let's
something
get this
they
one
did.
right next to us
There's
here
no
on the
reason
right.
why. And
Sure.
the people who are losing out here are all, they're all monarchies. There's a reason why you don't want to have people inherit offices. They don't tend to be very good at it.
Actually, so World War I, I'm not sure how you explain World War I using limited and, sorry, was it ultimate objectives? Or?
It's limited or unlimited. Well, I mean, they're different. It's useful in warfare to think about limited versus unlimited.
wow, that was
objectives.
easy.
So if you look at Ukraine today, Putin has one of the most unlimited kinds of objectives from Ukraine. He not only wants to topple the Ukrainian government, but he wants to eliminate
let's go back to
Ukrainian
extraction.
culture. And if you look up genocide
I
in the
guess, yeah.
dictionary, genocide can mean kill everybody, but it can also mean destroy their culture.
Yeah.
That also applies to genocide. So, so Putin has a very unlimited objective. Kiev, on the other hand, does not have an unlimited objective. I mean, as much as they'd like Putin to go, they want Russia to get out of Ukraine, right? Just get out of Ukrainian territory, stay in Russia. That's their objective. So the Ukrainians have a limited objective. Putin has an unlimited objective.
Yeah, in World War I, I mean, maybe other than like the Austro-Hungarian
gonna
Empire,
try to
there's, like,
grab this
like
resupply.
Germany doesn't have an unlimited objective with respect to France or
Oh,
Russia.
shit, there's a big
No,
dog
it
behind me.
doesn't.
I'm
It
just
still
gonna-
devolves into this.
I'm gonna
like,
start
10
bringing
million
the
people die.
extraction down, okay?
It doesn't,
Yeah, go-
although the effect
there's
on
the-
Russia is to overthrow the government. In fact, it winds up overthrowing one government after another. I think as that war goes on and as you lose a lot of people, then you start then the objectives become more unlimited. Whereas like originally it was just get back into German territory. After a while, it's no, we want to overthrow your government for doing this.
On a different topic, so your name is Sarah Payne.
Yeah.
When I go on Amazon and I find your books, they're not listed as Sarah Payne. They're listed under the author S.C.M. Payne.
That's correct.
Why is that?
Well, it's interesting. When I first started out, I just wanted my books to be read by what the content of the book was. I didn't want it to be read whether I was male or female. Just read it for being a book. And then when the first reviews came out, it was he. And this is by Americans doing this. And I thought, wow. I guess the idea, because I wasn't doing women's history, and this was a serious topic, that, women don't do serious topics. So I guess I'm glad I did it. So it looks like I'm a Briton, right? Because Britons love all the the initials. And then why do I have all the initials? It's because my dad named got from his side of the family are my 3 older brothers, and there's me and my mom felt that some names from her family ought to be dumped on me. And so since there were 3 older brothers, anyway, she had a lot of extra names going around. So she gave them to me, and I had no say in this.
When you're training these
would.
officers in the U.S. Naval War College, and you've done it over many decades, has the quality of the people you're training, has it improved, it decreased over time?
No,
What's your class been like?
They're wonderful people, and also I don't look at people like linear. I just it's a classroom. It has wonderful people in there. They're the next generation, and I will do everything I can for every single one of them to catapult them as far forward as I possibly
There's
can.
dudes to the
So that's
south
what
of
it is.
us.
Do
They
other
start
countries have
going.
some equivalent of the Naval War College where they have this professional cadre of historians and strategists where, going through the archives, trying to figure out insights for current leaders?
Well-
Not all my colleagues publish much of anything, so it varies. The Naval War College has always had a few very A-list people, and the most famous person by far ever to work there is Alfred Thayer Mahan. And he's 19th century, well, he dies early 20th century, but he's the guy
Oh, good job. There's
who,
something
when
there
the
for you to
United
loot. Oh.
States had been doing Manifest Destiny, a continental paradigm, because we're expanding, taking territory all the way to the Pacific. And he's the guy who says, power and position in the world really is about trade. And he writes these enduring books that have lasted to the present. So there are these occasional people like Alfred Thayer Mahan who are very special. And as for some cadre of anybody's, we're just professors. We teach mid-level and senior officers, and then most of them never become flag rank with the kind of leaders you're thinking about. So, I've talked to the occasional flag officer, but I'm just a minion. I mean,
So you started in Soviet studies, and you found yourself in the Soviet Union during its fall in 88, 89. Why was that the field you
That wasn't
started
so
in?
bad. It's way better than it was last time.
We went down
I
2
grew up
notches of
during the height of the
difficulty,
Cold War, and
but
this
that
is
was
family
that was
dinner time
totally fine.
conversations all about
That was
it.
good. Thank you for
Yes,
playing
and
that,
then,
Michaela. I forgot how fun this game can be, but I know
people
you're not as good as
describing
much
the
as I am.
Russians as
That was
being
really fun.
totally evil.
That was definitely more fun
And I
than
thought, well, I
playing
wanna learn more
Outer
about
Wilds,
this.
isn't
I'm
it?
curious.
I think so.
And then I realized, whoa.
Maybe it's because I have
It's
ADHD. I
just
have to constantly be
unbelievable
doing
how
something.
cruel the Russians have been to each other and others. It's like they're a class by
What do you think
themselves.
about this episode?
It's
I
good. I
looked it
didn't pay
up.
attention to absolutely all of it, so I could
So, and then
definitely
the
afford to
question is
rewatch it.
why,
Let's
and
go
learn
through all 3
more
of them, and then we can
about it. And
Talk
then
about it?
I
come back
history
later
would do a minor
and watch
field
them
as
again,
well,
maybe.
and I think the typical minor field for Russian history would be French or German. I thought, no, I want to learn about China, and just curious, and
Well,
then
it's
learn about
almost
China,
done.
and then
It's
I
like,
realized that
6
Russia and
months
China have
left.
relations, but then Japan always
Okay.
weighs in. So then I had to learn more about Japan. So that's where all of that led. And then I also thought I don't want to be studying the United States. That's where I'm from. And I want to learn about other countries. Also, my presumption is my bias would be pretty bad about the United States, or things I wouldn't see. I thought I'm going to study other places because I don't have any family ties. I mean, I'm not a descendant of Russian immigrants or Chinese or Japanese immigrants, obviously. So these are places that I'm not related to, and just curious.
What is the answer to that? You said you were trying to figure out why the Russians have been so cruel to each other through history, and especially, I guess, after the Communist Revolution. Why is it?
I don't know the answer, but I know I've just recently read The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I should have read it years ago when it came out, but I didn't, so I finally read it. And if you read that, look at the level of cruelty. It's mind-blowing. It isn't simply that the prisoners are mean to each other, or that the prison guards are mean to the prisoners, or the guards are mean to each other. All that's true. And it's not simply that the civilians outside of the Gulag are mean to everybody. It's family members who are mean to people who are in the Gulag. The neighbors are mean to the family members who have anyone who's in the Gulag. And you start looking and going, who's not being mean in this place? They're all being mean. And then you look at... then I haven't got the list of all the words, but then I was reading a lot of Russian stuff last winter, and then maintaining a list of words in Russian. Sila, it means strength or coercion in Russia. In English, strength doesn't mean coercion. It just means having power, right? But in Russian, it also means coercion. Or détente, it comes from the French, which means a relaxation of pressure. The Russian word, what it means is unloading a gun. So if you look at their language, it's so coercive. And I think probably if you're living in a really dangerous piece of real estate, which they are, no defensible boundaries, so you're always fighting people, and their answer to surviving that is to be meaner than anybody else. And they just do scorched earth. You mess with them, they kill everybody, and they just don't care. And okay, you want to? We have the modern world now, where we can deal with each other with international law. So none of that stuff is necessary. But the Russians have not pulled from that tradition. And you can read in the newspaper how absolutely cruel they are to their men in service. Right? They don't allow any of them to retreat. They've got the execution battalions behind them. So any kid who turns around, they're immediately murdered by their compatriots. Who treats their own people like this? Russians do, but other people don't.
I mean, Sergeant talks in that part about this is the direct result of the communist regime's policy, where if there's somebody's an orphan because their parents went to the gulags, if you try to help the orphan, you must be a sympathizer for the criminals, and therefore you must also be sent to the gulags. And so, like, you have these orphans running around who's like parents in some way.
The orphans, a lot of them were put into orphanages, and then they wound up being set up to join the KGB and other places. So they probably some of the execution battalion people. I don't know the details, but there's some of that going on. And the cruelty in Russia was remarked by Europeans who were traveling there in the 17th century. So it goes back a long time. About the level of cruelty. Peter the Great back in the day, he tortured his son to death. Who does that? He didn't have a replacement son either.
Unlike Stalin. Right. A final question: this new project you're doing on the Cold War, is it going to be a book? Is it going to how will it come out?
Slowly. I've been working on it for years. It'll be a culmination of previous research. Starts in 1917, it will end in 1991-ish. By 1917 we may not have noticed that these crazy communists in Russia were serious, but they did declare war on the capitalist order. It is really clear. The documentation is just there. And they were trying to fund people to overthrow governments in Europe all around the world immediately. This is in the teens, and then certainly in the 20s. So just because they weren't remotely powerful enough to do it, but they were like, what is it, a Maoist phase 1 insurgency where people aren't paying attention. They're like below the radar, but they're doing stuff. And it's going to be looking at all the strategies that the Russians played, that we played, what medium powers played, and what worked and what didn't. And it's going to be organized around concepts to understand these things. So on the one level, if I can do it right, it'll be a history of the Cold War from one year to another year. So there's that. And then there's another one about strategy. Okay, people are trying to achieve objectives, and they're trying different things and integrating different elements of national power. So it'll be that. And then what I found helpful in my own career
burst fire plasma
like limited and unlimited
sniper
war, or primary
It's
adversary,
not-
I
primary
just
theater,
tried
or
it
frozen
that last
conflict, or
game, and
detailed
it was
player.
not very
I find
good.
these things helpful.
Okay,
And so I'm going to put as
the
many of those
diligence
things
is
in
really
this
good, huh?
console.
I
And
find their
it's,
weapons
I'm
to
of a
be
certain
very
age, so it's passing the
underwhelming.
baton to the next
They have
generation.
so many
this is what I've
weapons, and I
managed to
just
figure
stay
out
with the same one
in,
because it's just
as
so
I go
much better than the rest.
reading in archives, and then others can skim it and see if there's anything worthwhile. If not, I tried, right?
I hope you'll come back on the podcast once the book is ready.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Sarah. This is the first in a 3-part series I did with her, where she distilled the lessons from a lifetime of deep scholarship. The other 2 are about Mao and Bushido, and I hope you'll tune into those as well. Until then, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps out a ton. And if you're interested in sponsoring a future episode, please reach out at dwarkeshpatel.com.
I don't like all of his stuff, but
Alright,
I
until the next
really
one.
like
See
his
you guys.
interviews with Sarah Payne.
I don't like all the interviews he's done too. There's only like
The
a
key
couple
to being
handful I
rich
feel like are really good. I like that
is
lady, that
knowing what
Chinese lady.
counts.
Yeah, she was great. I was thinking of her too. I honestly don't remember too many others off the top of my head, but she was the one that came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that one's done.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome.